Chapter 576. The wheelchair and senior Uncle Tai Lu, who was sitting in the wheelchair, turned into ashes. Jing Jiao turned around and walked toward the hut without giving it another look. No matter how the situation would turn out, senior Uncle Tai Lu's fate had been decided 4 years ago. Yes, for years ago, he had decided to kill him today. According to his cultivation state and lifespan, senior Uncle Tai Lu should have died a long time ago, but he was still alive in the sword jail. That was because he had chosen that extremely painful secret method to forcibly prolong his life. A person who could endure that kind of pain in order to live a few more years would certainly not leave this world peacefully. Such a person would definitely do something big before he left, burning his life of being a prisoner and suffering for hundreds of years into a violent flame. After Jing Jiao made his decision 4 years ago, he had to think about what would happen next. Aoyama could not be in chaos, and Sword Jail could not be in chaos either because the Snow Girl was still in there. Senior Uncle Tai Lu had to die. According to the rules of Aoyama, it was not convenient for him to kill Senior Uncle Tai Lu, who was imprisoned in Sword Jail. So, he had to let Fong Jingtian bring him out. Of course, this matter was not the main point today. It was convenient. Reverend Tai Lu was brought out of Sword Jail by Fong Jingtian, and he was the most reliable person he could use to identify Jing Jiao. But now he had died in front of him. Strangely, Fong Jingtian had remained silent from the beginning to the end and had not made any moves. There was no conspiracy here, and it was not that the two brothers had joined hands. Perhaps it was because the white cat had been staring at him. At this moment, Jing Jiao turned around and walked toward the hut. The white cat squatted on his shoulder, still looking at Fong Jingtian coldly. Fong Jingtian saw the drifting clouds outside the green sky formation and a faintly discernible, cold, and emotionless giant white shadow. Ada's meaning was very clear. If you move, I will move, and I will move to my death. You have just broken through the realm. I have been in the all-reaching realm for many years. Perhaps because of this, Fong Jingtian chose to do nothing in the end. He was the disciple of Taiping Jinren, the most orthodox disciple of Shangda Peak. Naturally, he would not be enraged by the death of immortal Tai Lu. Yet, Jing Jiao had killed the immortal Tai Lu in person, and he had succeeded in doing so, which surprised him a bit. Do you think it's useful to silence them? Fong Jingtian looked at his back and said. Jing Jiao ignored him. When he passed by Gu Qing, he picked him up and brought him back to the hut. Then he lightly patted his head. With a light clap, dozens of extremely pure sword intents were poured into Gu Qing's body, beginning to repair his damaged meridians and Dao tree. Gu Qing sat down cross-legged, closed his eyes, and continued his breakthrough. Previously, when he was trying to break through to the next realm, he was suppressed by enlightened Tai Lu's sword intent, causing him to be severely injured. Even his path of cultivation would come to an end. Now, it seemed that Jing Jiao's light palm had solved those problems. Jing Jiao glanced at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu walked over slowly with her head slightly lowered. She thought that she had not been obedient and wondered if she would be taught a lesson. Jing Jiao took out an elixir and put it in her hand. Zhao Liu naturally took it and swallowed it without asking what it was. Then, she glanced at Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu came to his senses, hurried to the hut, and stood respectfully behind his master. While the people of Shima Peak were doing these things, Tingguang Peak was very quiet. No one spoke. Countless eyes fell on the hut, with some curiosity, envy, and absurd emotions. Of course, most of them were horrified. Everybody saw with their own eyes that Jing Jiao suddenly appeared in front of the wheelchair and punched the immortal Tai Lu to death. Even though this most senior member of Green Mountain was at the end of his life and on the verge of death, he was nonetheless a figure in the heavenly arrival state. How could he be beaten to death? Was it the seal of the king of the underworld? Bu Qiuxiao asked in a deep voice. The cultivation practitioners burst into an uproar, and they looked at Jing Jiao in a different light. Fong Jingtian looked at Jing Jiao and said in a cold voice, "The seal of the king of the underworld has been tricked into your hands." Jingjiao lifted his head and looked around. Everywhere he looked, it was quiet. After he punched the immortal Tai Lu to death, his energy was almost the same as Yuan Qijing's. Jingjiao said, "Back when the king of the underworld was imprisoned in the fiend prison, it was agreed that the seal of the king of the underworld would be kept by Aoyama. I'm the sect master of Aoyama. What's wrong with the seal being in my hands?" Fang Jingtian looked at the spot where the wheelchair had been. There were a few cracks on the rock, and the ashes had already disappeared. Jingjiao lifted his head and looked at Jingjiao expressionlessly, saying, "You used the seal of the king of the underworld to kill an elder of our Aoyama. You, a devil, are too arrogant." Hearing this, Zhao Liu shot a glance at Yuan Chu. Having received the instruction from his master, Yuan Chu didn't dare hesitate. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and took one step forward. After clearing his throat, he said, "It has been mentioned in the 17th rule in the 3rd book of Book Yin." The crowd couldn't help but be taken aback, wondering what he was doing. A moment later, some disciples of Aoyama came back to their senses and realized that Jingjiao was talking about the sect rules of Aoyama. The sect rules of Aoyama were very complicated. They were divided into 5 volumes and 17 volumes, covering a wide range of areas. Except for those elders on the peak of the Shangda Peak, it was impossible for the regular disciples of Aoyama to remember even 1/10 of the sect rules. Yet, for Yuan Chu, the sect rules of Aoyama were like the 3-character classic read by a child when he was enlightened. He could recite them clearly without missing a single word. In a short time, he had picked out 7 sect rules from all the volumes of the sect rules of Aoyama, all of which were related to the killing of the immortal Tai Lu by Jingjiao. They were all very precise. These 7 sect rules all had the same meaning. First, the seal of the king of the underworld and any other treasures of Aoyama could be kept by the sect master in private. Second, immortal Tai Lu would be sentenced to death if he left the sword jail, and the sect master could kill him without any questions. Jingjiao was the sect master of Aoyama, and Jingjiao was the sect master. Of course, he could keep the seal of the king of the underworld and kill the immortal Tai Lu. As for the method of killing, did it matter? The cultivators of various sects, especially the disciples of Aoyama, were very surprised. They wondered how this person could be so familiar with the sect rules of Aoyama. What kind of place was Shima Peak? No one noticed Yuan Qijing's expression. He looked at Yuan Chu, who was speaking with confidence and composure. His eyes were warm and comforted. The cultivation practitioners who came to attend the inauguration ceremony of the sect master of Aoyama had at least ascertained one fact. This young sect master of Aoyama was definitely not the second son of the Jing house in Jiaoga City, but was either reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang or a sword devil who wanted to change the world. More people were inclined to believe the latter because of what Fang Jingtian had said and the appearance and death of the immortal Tai Lu. In everyone's eyes, Jingjiao had killed the immortal Tai Lu to silence him. He had killed the immortal Tai Lu, the only person who had seen the All-in-One, with a thunderous strike. Who could expose his true identity now? Most importantly, he was the sect master of Aoyama. He had killed the immortal Tai Lu cleanly. Even if everybody knew something was wrong, what could they do? Fang Jingtian said, while staring into his eyes, "In your current cultivation state, you can't unleash the full power of the seal of the king of the underworld. You can at most use the same strike once. What are you going to do next?" Jingjiao placed Ada on his knees and combed his hair with his fingers, saying nothing. Ada suddenly felt a bit frightened, and his fluffy white hair fluttered up instinctively. His face was very pale. It was evident that he had suffered the backlash of the seal of the king of the underworld and was in a weak state. But nobody dared to touch him. Looking at him in the chair, the gazes of the people were full of fear, bewilderment, and unwillingness. If he were in another story, he would be like a villain at the moment. Do you think you can kill all the disciples of Aoyama who don't like you? Even if the Master White Ghost helps you, we still have the Master Night Howler. You can't shut the mouths of the people in the world. A voice full of hatred and anger suddenly burst out from the crowd of Aoyama. Jing Jiao didn't look in that direction, but looked at the ocean of clouds in the distance, saying, "What you say has nothing to do with me. I don't need to explain who I am to you." It would be the most ridiculous thing in the world to explain who he was to others. Even if all the disciples of Aoyama and the people in the world think that I'm not Jingyang, what does it have to do with me? That was his attitude. Yuan Qijing was silent. Fang Jingtian was silent. Everyone was silent. The cultivation practitioner of Green Mountain, who had yelled out in anger and hatred, fell silent as well. It was quiet on Tianguang Peak. Suddenly, a voice came from the mountain path. The sun doesn't need to prove that he's the sun because there are countless direct and indirect evidences and experiences that prove it. It's a self-evident truth. But even if you have all the memories of the immortal Jingyang and are as narcissistic as he is, you're still not the real sun, and you're not the truth. So you should be proven, and you can be proven. The people looked at the mountain path in shock. A child wearing a royal blue robe was walking on a mountain path. It must be him who made the voice. The child cupped his hands in front of him. His sleeves fell down like seawater, covering his face. Some people noticed that his feet didn't touch the ground. Could it be that this blue-clothed child actually floated over? The child's voice was childish, and his tongue was curled. It sounded like a Zhongzhou accent. Many people wondered if this was a hidden killer move of the Zhongzhou school. Soon after, everyone overturned this idea, because they clearly sensed the chilly energy emitting from the child in blue. Swordsmen, like the leader of Ozawa, couldn't even hear his heartbeat. Where did this child in blue come from? Guinanshan and other disciples of Liangwang Peak were experienced in battles and had a keen intuition. They knew this person was not a friend, but they wondered in shock how this person passed through the great formation of Aoyama. While they were thinking about this, Lanhai Sword had flown up with 12 flying swords and surrounded the child in blue, ready to kill him at any time. "Show me your true face." The child in blue slowly put down his hands. His sleeves were parted like seawater, and his face was exposed. His face was childish, and the fringe on his forehead was like a leaf. His eyebrows were delicate, and his aura was chilly. He looked like an ice sculpture. What was more impressive was that there was a strange light on the child's face. The cultivation practitioners were in an uproar. This child in blue was a demon from the underworld. He might even be a royal member of the underworld. Today, the Aoyama sect was holding the inauguration ceremony for the head of the sect. How did he come to the summit? Why did he dare to come here? Did he come to court death? Many people thought that since this child in blue was a member of the royal family of the underworld and dared to show up here, he must be a powerful swordsman with a horrifying state. In the next moment, the child in blue might turn into a mountain-like demon and launch a crazy suicidal attack on the human cultivation practitioners. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectation. The child in blue looked at the Aoyama flying swords surrounding him, and his face was full of fear. He pursed his lips and almost cried. "My fellow disciples, can you not be so fierce?" The child in blue said innocently, "I'm just a letter." Guinanshan raised his eyebrows and asked, "What letter are you here to deliver?" The child in blue sighed and said, "You misheard. I'm not here to deliver a letter. I'm that letter." Yuan Qijing suddenly thought of the letter he had received when he jumped off the top of Tianguang Peak, and he fell silent. The child in blue turned to Jing Jiao in the hut and said, "I'm a letter from my master, Taiping Jinren. Happy birthday, Songyiren. I won't write you a letter because I don't know your address and I don't know you." Ahem. Chapter 577. The cultivation practitioners around Tianguang Peak were shocked again. It was because of the name Taiping Jinren. It wasn't surprising to hear the name Taiping Jinren from the mouth of this member of the royal family of the underworld. One of Taiping Jinren's crimes back then was that he colluded with the underworld and attempted to destroy the human race. It was evident that Taiping Jinren was behind the civil strife in Aoyama this time. He must have had something to do with Fang Jingtian taking the immortal Tai Lu away from the sword jail. But Bai Zhenren and the other important figures of various sects thought that Taiping Jinren would hide behind the scenes and control everything from a distance, just like he had done before. They didn't expect that he would take action in person, and his action was to write a letter. What was the content of the letter? Why did this member of the royal family of the underworld have to come in person? According to the child in blue, he was also the personal disciple of Taiping Jinren. No wonder he called those disciples of Aoyama fellow disciples when he saw Guan Nanshan's flying sword. He has taken another one. Looking at the child in blue on the peak top, Bu Xiao said with a grave countenance, and he dares to show up in broad daylight. This devil is getting more and more arrogant. The child in blue drifted slowly toward the peak top. The blue ocean sword and a dozen other flying swords surrounded him, following him. After confirming that this child from the underworld was not a threat, Yuan Qijing waved his hand to indicate that they didn't need to be too vigilant. Guinan Shan and the others took back their flying swords. The child in blue patted his chest, the leaf-like fringe on his forehead fluttering in the wind, looking somewhat adorable. He drifted toward the small hut. As he passed by the stone monument, he glanced at the round turtle reflexively, showing a frightened expression in his eyes. The round turtle didn't open his eyes. The child in blue drew back his gaze hastily and came to the front of the chair. Floating in the air, he knelt down before Jing Jiao and bowed solemnly. "Are you Apiao?" asked Jing Jiao. In the beginning, after Tong Yin entered the underworld, the mosquito had sent him some information. He easily understood everything. It was true that this child in blue clothing was the future king of the underworld chosen by the underworld master for Jing Jiao. She was also Apiao who had played chess with Tong Yin in the underworld for many years. Because of the agreement between Jing Jiao and the underworld master, Apiao was brought to the land of Chaotian by Tong Yin. She came to Aoyama through the small green curtain sedan. After doing something in the Hermit Peaks, she appeared on the top of Tianguang Peak. If all of this was planned by Taiping Jinren in advance, it would be really scary. The question was, why would Taiping Jinren allow Apiao, who might become the future king of the underworld, to appear in front of everyone at the Aoyama ceremony? He had schemed for such a long time and prepared for so many years. What exactly was he trying to achieve? Yes. Kneeling in the air, Apiao said to Jing Jiao, "Thank you for thinking so highly of this junior, immortal. However, I had already become a personal disciple of my teacher a few years before you were ready to take me on as your personal disciple." "Don't worry about it," said Jing Jiao. "Thank you for your understanding, immortal," said Apiao. Though the conversation was simple, it had many hidden meanings. Those who were observant would understand the hidden meanings. Moreover, it was evident that Apiao had said those words on purpose. Many people suspected that Jing Jiao had colluded with the underworld. This suspicion was not new. Back when the Zhongzhou school pressured the Aoyama sect at the Guoqing temple, the priests of the underworld suddenly appeared on the cold mountain one after another and were then killed by the Aoyama sect. The cultivation circle had already suspected it back then. It looked like these suspicions would be confirmed today. "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you like how I killed Senior Master Tai Lu?" asked Jing Jiao. The immortal Tai Lu deserted the sword jail without permission, so he deserved to die. Though I'm the disciple of Taiping Jinren, I've come to Aoyama to warn you today. Why should I die? Apiao said this with an innocent expression, as if she were truly innocent. This statement was a mess, but it seemed to make sense after the mess was over. Yet, Zhou Ruzhui and Yuan Chu felt the expression on this small devil of the underworld looked familiar, and they felt uncomfortable. Jing Jiao didn't intend to kill him, asking, "Where's the letter?" Apiao stood up and straightened her collar. "The immortal knows that you won't admit that you are a sword devil, and he even predicted that you wouldn't defend yourself and would kill the immortal Tai Lu directly," she said to Jing Jiao with a serious expression. "It's because you've taken the spiritual soul of the immortal Jingyang and inherited all his memories and temperament. Just like him, you don't like trouble and are lazy. But your problem is..." He turned around and looked at Fang Jingtian, saying seriously, "You've reached the heavenly arrival realm, so you must be a bit arrogant. You think you could do anything by inviting the immortal Tai Lu, but you don't know that it's all in vain." These words were impolite and could even be called a rebuke. But Fang Jingtian listened quietly, because it was a message on behalf of his master. He had been in closed-door training in the Hermit Peaks all these years, cutting off contact with the outside world, so he didn't know the arrangement of his master Taiping Jinren. He didn't leave the manor cave until the bamboo flute sounded and the wildflowers bloomed all over the mountain. Now that he thought about it, the bamboo flute should have something to do with this cute little child of the underworld. It turned out that his master was right about him. He was indeed a bit arrogant. The immortal Tai Lu couldn't play a decisive role. Even if the immortal Tai Lu were still alive, he couldn't overthrow Jingjiu from the position of the sect master of Aoyama. Which one is the proof of who I am? The spiritual soul or the physical body? The immortal Tai Lu had only seen the appearance of the sword devil, so how could he tell who Jingjiu was? This was still an unsolvable problem. "Stop nagging," said Jingjiu. Apiao understood his advice. She floated to the midair on the peak top and turned her head to look at him in the hut, saying, "You should be proven, and you can be proven." When he was still on the mountain path, he had already said these two sentences. He repeated it because it was important. By Zhenren, Bu, Xiao, Zen Master, Shui Nunnery, and other important figures in the cultivation circle had all remained silent from beginning to end. This was a major internal affair of the Aoyama sect. Keeping silent was a sign of respect. It was then that Zen Master suddenly spoke. He walked to the edge of the cloud platform barefoot, looked at the blue-clothed child on the peak top, and asked, "How can you prove that he is Jingyang, or that he is not Jingyang? I don't need to prove whether he is Jingyang or not. I only need to prove that he is the all-in-one sword, and then he is not Jingyang." Faced with Zen Master's inquiry, Apiao was very calm and indifferent, as if the blue-clothed child who was timid under the flying sword of Aoyama was not him. It was because he was Taiping Jinren writing the letter, and what he said was what Taiping Jinren wanted to say. "How can you prove that he is the all-in-one?" Apiao said, "The details Fang Jingtian found are only clues and suspicions, and the immortal Tai Lu's identification is only a witness. There is no concrete evidence, after all. To solve a case, clues are the index, and witnesses are the light. But only things like material evidence are the most credible. The problem was, how could there be any material evidence for this kind of thing? You are the evidence," Apiao said to Jingjiu, looking at him. This sentence seemed to be the same as what Fang Jingtian had said at the beginning, but everyone knew that it must be different. As expected, Apiao continued, "I have a way to prove that you are the all-in-one." Bai Jinren also stood up from the chair, walked to the edge of the cloud platform, and asked, "What way?" "When I was very young, I was sent to a village and studied with a teacher for several years." Apiao said, "During those years, apart from the most basic zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, as well as eating, drinking, and playing, I only learned one sword move." He was accepted as a successor by Taiping Jinren and a candidate to be the next king of the underworld, so his talent was naturally extraordinary. He had spent several years being taught by Taiping Jinren, but he had only learned one sword move. It was not hard to imagine how amazing that move was. Apiao looked at Jingjiu and said, "That move is the normalization of the inherited heaven sword style." Hearing this, the cultivation practitioners of other sects didn't have much reaction, nor did the disciples of other peaks in Aoyama. Only those of Tingguang Peak were quite surprised. Tingguang Peak had learned the inherited heaven sword style, but they had never heard of the normalization of the inherited heaven sword style. Even the elders like Emochi had never heard of this inherited heaven sword style, let alone the young disciples like Guannan Shan and Rujui. Fang Jingtian hadn't heard of the normalization of the inherited heaven sword style either, but his eyes lit up as he guessed what it was. Yuan Qijing slightly raised his eyebrows. Fu Wang, Chen Yutian, and the other peak heads were moved. The cultivation circle had always thought that the principal sword of Aoyama was the inherited heaven sword, but in fact, the inherited heaven sword was merely a sheath. The real principal sword of Aoyama was a devil sword called All-in-One. It could even be said that the entire Aoyama came from the All-in-One sword. Many years ago, the founding Grandmaster of Aoyama picked up this devil sword among the Green Peaks. He had finally found a way to control it after many years of trying. It was the sheath of the inherited heaven sword that he had built himself, and the corresponding sword move. Later on, all the sect masters of Aoyama would control the all-in-one sword with the sheath of the inherited heaven sword. Only such a person was qualified to be the true sect master. However, the all-in-one sword suddenly disappeared among the peaks of Aoyama many years ago as the immortal Daiyuan and the immortal Chinjo died suddenly. Taiping Jinren and the dead dog had been searching for it secretly in Aoyama for many years, but they couldn't find it. Unexpectedly, this sword had fallen into the hands of Jingjio. Of course, it was also possible that Jingjio was that sword move. The returning to one, mentioned by Apyao, was the sword move that could control all-in-one. Immortal, do you want to prove that you are not the all-in-one? It's simple, Apyao said to Jingjio. Please take out the inherited heaven sword, and let me try this sword move. What do you think? It was deathly quiet among the peaks of Aoyama. The iron eagles on the distant sword peaks didn't take off. The atmosphere became a bit weird. Everybody looked at Jingjio. The inherited heaven sword was in his hands. If he was willing to take it out and let Apyao try it with the returning to one move, it would prove that he was not that sword devil. If he was unwilling to take it out, then the answer would be revealed. It turned out that the letter from the immortal Taiping was directed at this sword. There's an activity at the top of the comment section of this book. According to the moderator, it's easy to participate. You can search for the Path Toward Heaven in the Chidian 515 activity and join the team. Then you can go to the comment section and post your picture. There will be some Chidian coins and physical rewards. Those who are interested can go and have a look. Chapter 578. It was naturally difficult to learn the one style of the inherited heaven sword style. Even with Apyao's talent, it would take her a few years to master it. However, it was not difficult for those figures in the heavenly arrival state to master it. The key was to keep it a secret. Except for those who had been the sect master of Aoyama, nobody knew this sword style. If someone else knew how to use the all-in-one sword, how could the sect master of Aoyama keep his position? Unexpectedly, Taiping Jinren had taught this sword style to Apyao. In the deep heart of the sword jail, at the end of the gloomy passageway, the snow girl was wrapped in a quilt, squatting on the bamboo chair. She looked at the fake snowy mountains and icy peaks on the fake windows, as if she would never get tired of looking at them for tens of thousands of years. Suddenly, she turned around and looked in the direction of Tianguang Peak. A gleam flashed in her black eyes, and she uttered two chirps, full of disdain and mockery. In the deep part of the southern wilderness, in a deserted mountain god temple, the blue bird landed on a tree branch. He tilted his head slightly, feeling puzzled as he glanced at the familiar godly statue in the temple. In the next moment, he landed on the ground and covered the exposed corner of the green sky mirror with his claws. As if he had suddenly sensed something, he turned his head in the direction of Aoyama and uttered two chirps, still full of puzzlement. No matter whether he uttered or chirped, he was still chirping. The one style of the inherited heaven sword style was like a magic treasure that could identify people and devour their souls. Would you dare respond to it when chirped? It was quiet on the top of Tianguang Peak. Everybody was waiting for Jingjio's decision. Sitting on the chair, Jingjiu stroked the back of the white cat slowly and steadily with his right hand, saying nothing. If he were the immortal Jingyang, he could take out the inherited heaven sword and ask Apyao to prove his identity. Why hadn't he expressed his opinion yet? It was well known that the longer he waited, the more suspicious he would be. The inherited heaven sword is the sacred treasure of the sect master of Aoyama. How could he give it to a devil man of the underworld? Zhao Liu said coldly. It was impossible that the immortal Taiping hadn't predicted this. Apyao looked at her and said, "If you don't believe me, I can teach Brother Yuan Qijing the returning to one and let him try." There was no one who doubted Yuan Qijing's character. He and Taiping Jinren had fallen out a long time ago, and he was the sword justice of Aoyama. He was the most suitable person to do this. At this point, Taiping Jinren had blocked all of Jingjio's escape routes. The thunder in the sky had already stopped. The top of Tianguang Peak was silent. Even the sound of the white cat's yawn could be heard clearly. Time passed slowly, and the atmosphere became more and more heavy and tense. The expressions of Guinan Shan and the other Aoyama disciples grew increasingly grim. Even Lei Il Kyung, Yao Song's Han, and the others began to feel lost. Jing Jiao still didn't say anything, nor did he intend to take out the sheath of the inherited heaven sword. Looking at his back, Zhao Lei's eyes were a bit gloomy, thinking that there was no harm in letting Yuan Qijing hold the sheath for the time being. Why did he have to go against Tai Pingzhenren? Yes, there were at least 1,300 cultivation practitioners present, but she was the only one who knew what was on Jing Jiao's mind. Those who didn't know what was on Jing Jiao's mind naturally had other ideas. In their eyes, the fact that Jing Jiao didn't dare to take out the sheath of the inherited heaven sword meant that he was the all-in-one sword. The emotions in the eyes that fell on him gradually changed. Trust turned into suspicion, calmness turned into pain, doubt turned into complacency, and confusion turned into hatred. No wonder you were such a genius when you were young. Master Lu, the disciple of Shangda Peak who had brought Jing Jiao and Lu Shui to the South Pine Pavilion, thought bitterly. Back then, you were so lazy and arrogant. Was it because you were the demon's sword? Lin Wuji, the disciple of Tianguang Peak who had taken care of Jing Jiao by the sword-washing stream, thought suspiciously and uneasily. No wonder you were able to defeat your opponent of a higher state and break Gua Nanshan's sword during the sword test in Aoyama. There's no such thing as the born shapeless sword body. You were actually a sword demon. Fu Wang, the master of Yunxing Peak, thought in disgust as he recalled what had happened over the years. On the cloud platform where the Platonist sect was located, Sensei looked at the top of Tianguang Peak and Jing Jiao, who was still sitting in the chair, looking very nervous. Her hands hung by her sides, clenching into fists, and she kept shouting in her mind, "Take it out! Take it out!" In the wheelchair in front of her, the master of the Platonist sect, Chun Shueqiao, was very calm, and there was even a hint of laziness in her beautiful eyes. She said with some regret, "So you are a sword demon. No wonder you are so good-looking." Among the thousands of cultivators present, there was another person who had a similar reaction as Chun Shueqiao. Junior Sister Yushan crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at Jing Jiao, who was not far away. Her bright eyes were twinkling like the stars in the night sky. She looked a little absent-minded, thinking, no wonder the sect master is a sword demon. No wonder he is so good-looking. At this moment, a tall figure blocked her line of sight. She was a little anxious and wanted to ask him to move aside, but she suddenly realized that it was her uncle master. She stuck out her tongue and stepped back. Accompanied by the light snow, Yuan Qijing landed on the top of Tianguang Peak. He looked at Apiao, Fang Jingtian, and Jing Jiao, remaining silent for a long time. The wind and snow were still drifting like willow catkins, making people feel suffocated and suffocated. Just when everyone felt that the tense atmosphere was unbearable, he suddenly sighed and said, "Even if he is the all-in-one, what can he do?" There was an uproar among those who didn't know the secret history of the Aoyama sect. Even the regular disciples of the Aoyama sect felt the same way. They didn't understand why the senior master sword justice, who had always been serious and upright, would say such a thing. If Jing Jiao was indeed the devil of the heavenly sword, he should be captured or even killed. Yet, the peak masters and some experienced elders of the Aoyama sect remained silent. It was because they were fully aware of what the all-in-one sword meant to the Aoyama sect. A great many years ago, a devil sword appeared in the south of Chaotian. Heaven and earth responded to it, and the spiritual sources gathered together, forming a peak. The sword wills in the peaks nurtured themselves and produced flying swords continuously. This was the current Yunxing Peak. It was because the founding Grandmaster obtained this devil sword that he comprehended the true meaning of the sword work and founded the Aoyama sect. Without the all-in-one sword, there would be no Aoyama sect. This was a practical way of saying it, and also a spiritual way of saying it. You're wrong. It's because he is a sword devil, not a sword spirit. The voice of Apiao echoed on the top of Tianguang Peak, calm and resolute. Many people, like Yuan Qijing and Fang Jingtian, who had been familiar with Taiping Zhenren, had an illusion at the moment. The child in blue clothing hovering in the air was not a member of the royal family from the underworld, nor was it a letter. It was Taiping Zhenren who wrote the letter. Some people seemed to see a huge figure of a ferryman behind Apiao. Apiao came to the front of the hut and said 3 sentences while looking down at Jingjiao. If you were the true spirit of the all-in-one sword, you would be worshipped by the Aoyama sect for generations to come. But when the immortal Jingyang brought you to ascend, you suddenly became greedy and took his spiritual soul for your own use. You killed him and ate him, so you are of course a devil. The expression on Chun Yotian's face changed slightly, as he thought that the all-in-one sword couldn't be kept if this was the case. A cold intent appeared in Fu Wang's eyes. Nan Wang was the only one who was still looking at the distance with an indifferent expression on his face. It was unclear what was on his mind. Apiao continued while looking at Jingjiao, not to mention that you colluded with the underworld in an attempt to re-establish the king of the underworld after obtaining the position of the sect master of Aoyama. Why did those priests of the underworld die on the cold mountain? What kind of deal did you have with the underworld master? I saw it with my own eyes. Do you need any proof? Hearing this, Bu Qiuxiao turned around and shot a glance at Lu Shui, saying, "You're not allowed to move later." Bai Zhenren thought that this was indeed the style of Taiping Zhenren. It was the same as when the Aoyama sect intended to wipe out the Western Sea Sword School. He went to the West Sea and used himself as a target. This time he intended to wipe out Jingyang or the all-in-one sword, and he used a similar method. But it was unclear why the child in blue clothing of the underworld was willing to do so. Jingjiao also wanted to know the answer, so he asked Apiao, "What did that person promise you?" If Apiao hadn't shown up that day, she would have become his personal disciple the next day. In a dozen or a few decades, he would have obtained the seal of the king of the underworld and become the ruler of the underworld. What kind of condition did Taiping Zhenren offer him that made him refuse to be the king of the underworld? "My teacher treats me very well," Apiao went on, "and he promised to take me to the human world to cultivate and study, so I won't have to go back there." This condition seemed simple and even a bit absurd, but one could figure out its meaning after thinking about it carefully. For the people of the underworld, living in Chaotian was like ascending. If one asked any cultivation practitioner in Chaotian to choose between ascending and becoming the emperor, they would choose the former without hesitation. Oh, that's why. Jingjiao didn't say anything more. In terms of understanding the underworld, he was indeed inferior to that person, so it was understandable that he didn't predict this. By now, the situation had become clear. Most of the people believed what Fang Jingtian had said. Jingjiao was not the reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang, but the all-in-one sword devil who had seized the spiritual soul of the immortal Jingyang. The atmosphere became exceedingly tense. The swordsmen of various sects on the cloud platform had a grave expression on their faces. The elders and disciples of various peaks of Aoyama looked at Jingjiao in the chair, their eyes full of vigilance. Some of them had even called out their flying swords, ready to attack at any moment. A dark cloud suddenly drifted over in the high sky, blocking the sunlight. Soon after, the raindrops fell down. For some reason, the raindrops had passed through the great formation of Aoyama and landed on the cliffs. It was not the gentle spring rain, but the approaching storm. The immortal wants to ask, how do you feel now that you have colluded with the underworld and have been betrayed by your friends and family, and are about to be imprisoned in the sword jail? Asked Apiao while looking at Jingjiao. Each part of this statement was a story, and the word also could be added to it. They were all experiences of Taiping Zhenren. "I don't feel anything," said Jingjiao. "It's because what happened to him will never happen to me." The immortal has one last question. Apiao said, "Perhaps you still think that you are the immortal Jingyang, but have you ever thought that you might have forgotten that you are the all-in-one?" This question was the real sword that pierced the heart. If a person lost his own memory and obtained a new, complete memory, He would think that he was that person, only to find out in the end that it was all an illusion. How helpless and sorrowful would that be? All the cultivators who heard this question fell into silence. Indeed, this was also a possibility. Perhaps when Jingjiu woke up, he had already inherited the memories of the immortal Jingyang, and thus believed that he was the immortal Jingyang. If that was the case, what did he do wrong? Many disciples of Aoyama and cultivators from other sects had the same thought. For instance, Chun Yutian, Mei Li, Lin Wuji, and Zhun Tao of Shui Nunnery suddenly felt sympathetic when they saw Jing Jiu sitting alone in the chair. Bai Jinren raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't understand why Taiping Jinren would ask this question when he was about to lock Jing Jiu in the sword jail and win the battle. Maybe some people think that he is trying to find a way out for me. No, he's just used to winning the battle in the end. Jing Jiu continued. He wants me to doubt myself and think that I might be the all-in-one. Only in this way can he win the battle. After a moment of silence, Ah Piao said, "But it's true that you don't know who you are. At least, you can't prove it. Who am I?" It was a question that sounded extremely simple, but many people would feel fearful if they thought more about it, just like the abyss. Who am I? I was born in Zhaoga City. It was the 12th lunar month, and it was snowing. I was born with natural Tao quality, and I had an outstanding talent since I was a child. I had never played zither or painted, but studied and prepared for cultivation. I was brought to Aoyama at a young age, and I am the master of Shinma Peak now. I am Zhao Leiyu. But if one day I met a young girl with the same messy short hair and distinct black and white eyes, she would insist that she was Zhao Leiyu, and that she had the same appearance and memory. How could I prove that I was the real Zhao Leiyu? How could I convince her that she was not Zhao Leiyu, or the concept of Zhao Leiyu was not mine to begin with, or she could leave me at any time? But Zhaoga City, snowflakes, seasons, talent, appearance, body, hobbies. If one day I lost all the memories of Zhao Leiyu, wouldn't I be Zhao Leiyu? Who would I be at that time? This is indeed a difficult question. Zhao Leiyu was pulled back from her thoughts by a nonchalant voice, and she found that Jing Jiu was looking at her. She shook her head slightly, indicating that she had no problem with it. Looking at the cultivation practitioners in the peaks of Aoyama, Jing Jiu said, "But as a cultivation practitioner, I have to solve this problem first." Zen Master reached out his hand and picked up a wildflower from the cloud. "Who are you then?" he asked seriously. Jing Jiu said, "I am the direction of all my karma." Zen Master laughed. "You are indeed my master. Marx, the essence of a human being is the sum of all social relationships." Chapter 579. Everything in the world was in the cause and effect. 10 years of life and death. Inside and outside the lonely grave. Even though I love you 3,000 times, I still have to turn around and leave. A bosom friend in the high mountains and flowing rivers. An old friend who collects the corpses at the city gate. Hearing the words of the owner, I will travel 1,000 miles to kill someone for the owner. There is no need for the owner to say anything. I will fight my way through the sea of people for the owner, even if there are tens of thousands of people. All these are the causes and effects. There is no need to talk about the coming of the mortal world like the flowing river, and there is no need to talk about 3 lifetimes and 3 lifetimes. One would toss and turn on the pillow and forget the taste of food, making one look haggard. There is a flower in the middle of the mountain, enduring the sunshine and rain for many years. If you happen to pass by and take a look at it, it is the cause and effect of the two of you. If you leave the mountain, nobody will take a look at it, and it is the cause and effect of the two of you. When someone comes and takes a look at it, he builds a thatched hut by the flower and stays there, taking care of and watering the flower every day. Only then will another cause and effect come into being. Every cause and effect of a person is a straight line from one point to another. Countless causes and effects are innumerable lines, and those lines will meet at a certain point, which means they will lead to that point. And that point is you. Who am I? I am Jingyang. Who is Jingyang? A person came to Aoyama from Zhaoga City many, many years ago. He started his cultivation and stayed behind closed doors on the peak of Shangda Peak. Once in a while, he would eat hot pot with his big brother, Lu Ci and Yuan Qijing. In the following years, he spent most of his time in a daze, and he had helped the Devil Sword and the Devil Cat evade the pursuit of his big brother and the dead dog. A few decades ago, he was on the verge of ascension, and he wanted to make some preparations for Aoyama. As such, he went to Xiaoga City and saw the baby in the belly of the woman amid the flying snow. A few years later, he saw another baby in a small village. Jingyang was not the person with the name Jingyang, the memory and talent of Jingyang, and the appearance of Jingyang. This was because one's appearance could be changed, one's memories and talent could be inherited, and one's name could be changed. In fact, Jingyang was not Jingyang. He was Zhao Leiyu and Lu Shisui's master, Yuan Qijing's junior martial uncle, the resentful owner of the broken porcelain pieces in Duke Lu's residence, and the person that the whole of Aoyama had watched for 1,000 years. We are not us. We are the children of our parents. We are the parents of our children. We are the partners of our partners. We are the drinking buddies of our drinking buddies. We are the gambling partners of our gambling partners. We are what the world sees us as. The point of cause and effect is us. And we are the cause and effect of the world. So, if you want to prove that we are who we are, please start from the other end of those karmic lines. Only then can you be irreplaceable. Tingguang Peak was very quiet, because not many people could understand what Jingjiu was saying. I am the direction of all my causes and effects. In fact, that was all he said. The rest were the different perceptions of everyone. Yuan Chu kept scratching his head, almost causing smoke to come out again. He seemed to understand, but not really. Gu Qing opened his eyes and looked at his master beside him. He had successfully broken through the realm, but his mind was thinking about that year on the sea of ice and wind, the straight line that led to the Arctic. Zhao Leiyu was also thinking about the straight line that broke through the sea of ice and wind. Zhua Rizhui was also thinking about it. The peaks of Aoyama were shrouded in a very mysterious atmosphere. Suddenly, an extremely angry shout rudely destroyed the atmosphere. Even if you have a beautiful tongue, you can't change the fact that you are a sword demon. The shout came from the crowd of Tingguang Peak. It was the same person. After Jingjiu killed Immortal Tai Lu with a punch, this person had reprimanded him, asking if he was going to kill all the disciples of Aoyama. The elder of Tingguang Peak, Bai Rujing, was finally released after being imprisoned in the sword jail for many years. Bai Rujing walked out from the crowd, stared at Jingjiu, and said harshly, "You sword demon, surrender now." The young Zen master was pondering what Jingjiu had just said, finding it quite interesting. He couldn't help but feel displeased when he was suddenly interrupted by this shout. He looked at Bai Rujing with furrowed brows, wondering if Bai Rujing had a damn death wish. But many cultivators didn't understand what Jingjiu said. They were reminded by this shout. That's right, why should I listen to this sword demon? Jingjiu's refusal to take out the sword of inherited heaven had made most of the cultivators accept what Fang Jingtian and the child in blue said. They couldn't believe that Jingjiu was a mortal Jingyang just because of his vague words. In their eyes, Jingjiu was the sword demon who killed a mortal Jingyang and stole the position of the sect master of Aoyama. Moreover, this sword demon was colluding with the underworld. Who knew what he wanted to do? If he became the sect master of Aoyama, he would endanger the safety of Aoyama, the entire orthodox cultivation world, and even the human race. How could the cultivators allow such a thing to happen? Kill this demon. Bai Rujing looked at Jingjiu and shouted harshly. Along with this shout, dozens of flying swords flew up from all over Tingguang Peak, piercing the wind and pointing at Jingjiu in the hut. This was Aoyama. The cultivators of various sects didn't move, but the elders and disciples of Aoyama, who hated evil, couldn't stand it anymore. Looking at the dozens of sword lights in the sky, Bai Rujing was filled with boundless pride and the pleasure of revenge. But Jingjiu didn't look at him. A blood-red sword light illuminated the top of Tingguang Peak. The thoughtless sword pierced through the air and cut the leading flying sword in half coldly. Then Dozens of flying swords came from all over the peak, blocking the flying swords that intended to kill Jingjiao. The crisp sounds of flying swords colliding rang out like a rainstorm and then stopped abruptly. Hundreds of flying swords were divided into two groups, hovering in the sky above Tingguang Peak, trembling slightly, ready to strike again at any time. Among the flying swords that came to protect Jingjiao, there were disciples of Shangda Peak and disciples of Tingguang Peak. Surprisingly, dozens of flying swords were from disciples of Liangwang Peak. Everyone knew that Jingjiao didn't like Liangwang Peak. After he became the sect master, he imposed many restrictions on Liangwang Peak. The young disciples of Liangwang Peak complained about this. But why did it turn out like this? Seeing this, many people found it strange. Even Yuan Qijing was surprised. Guananshan turned his head around and glanced at Yao Songshan. Yao Songshan's ranking in Liangwang Peak had risen from 11th to 8th. He breathed steadily and looked straight ahead without saying anything. Guananshan looked at Lei Ilkyung again. Under the gaze of the eldest brother, Lei Ilkyung was a little surprised, but he said stubbornly, "What's wrong with protecting the sect master?" In fact, even he was doubting the identity of Jingjiao. But when he saw those flying swords flying toward the hut, he summoned his flying swords to fight without thinking. This was probably like the Battle of the West Ocean, when Taiping Jinren was about to be killed by the swordsmen of various sects, but Aoyama's sword just flew away. In the words of Elder Mo Chi, this was because he couldn't help it. Over 100 flying swords confronted each other in the sky, and the atmosphere was very tense. Everyone knew that this was just the beginning. Most of those who couldn't help it were the disciples of the younger generation. The elders of the peaks were still silent, especially the peak masters. Fu Wang, the peak master of Yunxing, looked a little hesitant. His thin and long right hand moved slightly in the wind, as if he could hold a sword at any time. Chun Yutian looked at the white cat in Jingjiao's chest with furrowed brows, thinking that the master white ghost wouldn't make a mistake. But he was a devil cat to begin with, so he must be close to the devil sword. Yuan Qijing looked at Jingjiao in the hut, waiting for him to say something before making a decision. Nan Wang looked at the mountain in the distance with his hands behind his back. He didn't look at the scene at all, as if he didn't care about it at all. The big figures kept silent for a long time, making the atmosphere more tense, and the disciples of the peaks of Aoyama even more at a loss. Guhan was ready to draw his sword. He looked at Guan Nanshan and asked, "Senior brother?" Guan Nanshan looked serious, indicating that he didn't know the answer either. He looked at Zhuo Ruzhui. "Don't look at me. I don't know anything." Zhuo Ruzhui said expressionlessly, "I may look calm, but I'm panicking inside, okay?" The silence couldn't last forever. The confrontation would eventually turn into a fight of swords. By then, the sky full of sword lights would definitely turn Tingguang Peak into ruins. Among the two camps, there were obviously fewer people who supported Jingjiao, and most of them were young disciples. Someone suddenly thought Guang Yuanjiren was sent to the West Ocean not long ago, and he wasn't even allowed to come back to attend the sect leader ceremony. Could it be that Jingjiao had already predicted today's situation? The atmosphere on Tingguang Peak was getting more and more tense. Suddenly, a dignified but tired voice sounded. "Since when has Aoyama been in such a difficult situation?" Though Yuan Qijing didn't show any expression on his face, everyone could see his anger and sadness. That day was the sect leader ceremony of Aoyama, and all the important figures in Chaotian were present. So many other sects were watching, but the situation had turned out this way. Was the Green Mountain sect going to stage a fight between their own sect members in front of so many outsiders? "I think so too," said Jingjiao. Fang Jingtian, the immortal Tai Lu, and Apiao were all plotted by his big brother. His big brother intended to oust him from the position of the sect leader of Aoyama and then kill him, because his big brother thought he was the all-in-one. In his big brother's opinion, Aoyama used swords, but he couldn't be used by swords. This was something he couldn't accept. Jingjiao walked to the foot of the stone monument and took a look at the distant Shinma Peak. "Let's go," he said while patting the back of the stone turtle. This statement didn't have a subject or a direction. Was he bidding farewell to the stone turtle or informing someone else? Got it, said Zhao Liu. Gu Qing stood up and walked over with the sword of the universe in his hands to invite his master to ride on it. Yuan Chu walked over with his head lowered, not daring to take a look at Yuan Qijing. Want to leave? It's not that easy. Bai Rujing's cold voice rang out. An exceedingly formidable sword light slashed toward Jingjiu by the stone monument. Having been imprisoned in the sword jail for a few years, Yuan Qijing had carefully reviewed his defeat and was certain that Jingjiu's cultivation state was far inferior to his, and Jingjiu relied on the energy of the white ghost to succeed in sneak attacking him. Though Jingjiu had killed the immortal Tai Lu with one punch, he had consumed a great deal of his energy, so he couldn't strike again. Of course, he wouldn't forget about the white ghost, and he didn't expect to break through the defense of the white ghost and hurt Jingjiu. What he wanted was a chaotic situation. A single spark could start a prairie fire. As long as the power of his flying sword could stimulate the fighting will of the crowd, countless flying swords would fall. Once the top of Tianguang Peak was in chaos, Jingjiu would definitely die. It took him only a short time to think about these things. His flying sword had already arrived by the stone monument and then disappeared. No one knew where that sharp sword light had gone. It couldn't show any power at all. It was like a bubble dissipating in the air. Ada closed his mouth and burped. A devilish blood color flashed in the depths of his vertical pupils. An enormous shadow of a white tiger appeared vaguely in the sky, exuding a terrifying pressure. It turned out that the flying sword had been swallowed by the white tiger. Bai Rujing's real sword was snatched away, and his sword pill was injured, spitting out a mouthful of blood essence. An exceedingly gorgeous blood-red sword light swept past. A miserable scream came from the top of Tianguang Peak. Two arms flew through the air and landed on the ground one after another. The thoughtless sword returned to the front of Zhao Liu. She calmly walked to the back of Jingjiu. She didn't even look at Bai Rujing, who had turned into a bloody man. Chapter 580. Everything happened too fast. The flying swords on the top of Tianguang Peak didn't react at all. That was why the disciples of Aoyama were so shocked. Once the flying swords were out, life and death would be decided immediately. The reason why they were shocked was not because of the blood on the cliff, the pair of broken arms, or the screaming elder Bai. The reason why they were shocked was not because of the result. Zhao Liu was the most talented genius in Aoyama's sect, and she had reached the upper state of free travel at such a young age. Even though she hadn't reached the state of broken sea, she took the opportunity when Bai Rujing's flying sword was swallowed by the Lord White Ghost. The key was that none of the disciples of Aoyama expected that Zhao Liu would take the opportunity to take the sword out. The timing she chose to take the sword out was too cruel and merciless, giving people a feeling that she would do anything. The disciples of Aoyama could only see such a feeling from the evil sex. They didn't expect to see such a feeling from her. Zhao Liu had natural Taoist quality, and she was the most admired by the young disciples of Aoyama before Jingjiu. She was like a fairy in the eyes of others. Later, she became the master of Shinma Peak, holding a high position and power. She was far away from the ordinary disciples, and she was even more unreachable. Who could have expected to see such a scene today? It wasn't until now that many disciples of the Green Mountain remembered that Zhao Liu had killed many cultivation practitioners and demons back when she left the mountain to travel for the first time. Her cultivation state wasn't very high, but she had killed many cultivation practitioners and demons, shocking the whole human world. They couldn't help but feel bewildered, thinking that she was actually such a brutal person. Squatting on Jingjiu's shoulder, Ada took a look at Zhao Liu and then at Nan Wang, who was standing at the edge of the cliff and looking into the distance, wondering why they were all like this. You, a sword devil, dared to attack the elder of my sect. Fang Jingtian stared at Jingjiu and said coldly, after doing so many evil things, do you still want to leave Aoyama alive? Everyone saw with their own eyes that it was Zhao Liu who made the move, but did not affect him from blaming Jingjiu for this. You've been extremely boring ever since you entered the sect, and today is especially so. You spoke too much, wanting to display your intelligence too much, yet you appeared very stupid, because intelligence is useless in the first place. Jingjiu looked at him and said, "Your master is the smartest person in the world, but why has he still achieved nothing and can only wander around like a dog?" Hearing this insult to his master, Fang Jingtian's eyes became even more gloomy, and his killing intent became even stronger. Jingjiu said, "It's because he's too smart and too competitive. He always wants to predict what I'm thinking, but he doesn't know that I have nothing else in my heart. I don't have any thoughts at all. I've never thought about how to convince you that I'm Jingyang, and I've never thought about being the sect leader. Then how can he defeat me?" Fang Jingtian sneered and wanted to ask why you accepted senior brother Lu Ci's posthumous edict if you don't have any thoughts. Why do you have to do so many things? Before he could speak, Jing Jiu continued, "You can't keep me here. Later, you'll ask why I didn't leave the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld behind since I'm leaving." Many elders and disciples still couldn't decide which side to take. They thought that it was true and that it was fine to leave, but since you don't want to be the sect leader of Aoyama, you should leave the two treasures behind. Both the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld could only be controlled by the sect leader of Aoyama. I won't take out the inherited heaven sword, and I won't take out the seal of the king of the underworld, Jing Jiu said calmly, because I won't hand over the sect leader of Aoyama. Hearing this, everyone was shocked. You're going to leave Aoyama with the people of Shinma Peak. Isn't that the same as abdicating? I'm Jingyang. Then I'm still the same as I was before. After saying this, Jing Jiu led Zhao Leiyu and the others to the cliff. The top of Tingwang Peak was silent. No one knew what to say. What was enlightened Jingyang like? The young disciples of Aoyama didn't know, but the 9 peak leaders like Fang Jingtian and Fu Wang and the experienced elders wouldn't forget. Uncle Jingyang didn't care about worldly affairs. He only knew how to cultivate in seclusion. Occasionally, when something big happened and he was disturbed by Lu Ci and Yuan Shijing, he would only say one sentence. That sentence was not the catchphrase of the Aoyama sect. "Do you want to die?" It was really annoying. So you didn't leave Aoyama because you were annoyed, but because you were annoyed? Seeing Jing Jiu walking to the edge of the cliff, many cultivation practitioners had a feeling that it was absurd. Only the dead won't be annoyed. Fang Jingtian said expressionlessly, "An extremely cold sword will appear in the sky." The sea of clouds sensed it and extended countless fine threads, which looked like branches and leaves. At the end of those branches and leaves, there was a tangible sharpness condensed by the sword will. The sword will, which could bend and straighten, covered the entire sky like the branches of a plum tree that had been twisted by man. No matter how unpredictable and fast Jing Jiu's movements were, he couldn't pass through it. Was this the power of a heavenly arrival state figure? How did Fang Jingtian do it? He had just reached the heavenly arrival state, but it was difficult for even a cultivator at the peak of the heavenly arrival state to cover the sky and earth in an instant. Today, Bai Zhenren was the one with the highest state, and she was the only one who had seen the truth. Fang Jingtian had been talking since he pushed the wheelchair to Tingwang Peak. Later, the immortal Tai Lu was punched to death by Jing Jiu, and Bai Rujing's arms were chopped off by Zhao Leiyu. But he didn't do anything. He only spoke sullenly, angrily, with a sneer, of the evidence, and of the things that, by reason of reason, he ought to have said. As Jing Jiu had said, it was really boring. Who would have thought that from the very beginning he had been pouring the sword will in his body into Tingwang Peak through his feet? The sword will turned into the weakest strands, penetrated the mountain peak, and reached the sea of clouds. Then it gradually accumulated until it finally formed the power of the sea. With a thought, he could cover the sky and earth and trap Jing Jiu and Aoyama. Yes, the 4th disciple of Taiping Zhenren, the one who had kept a low profile in Aoyama for many years, broke through the hermit peaks in just 7 years and became a flower in the heavenly arrival state, Fang Jingtian. He could be boring, but how could he be incompetent? the sword that covered the sky, and earth fell like a storm. A flying sword slashed at Jingjio. It came in a hurry, like a year old. The elders and disciples of Shilai Peak, and more disciples of Aoyama, who thought Jingjio was the sword demon, also rushed over on their flying swords. The beautiful spring sun dimmed in an instant. Countless bright sword gleams illuminated the top of Tianguang Peak, piercing through the air. The flying swords that wanted to protect Jingjio were instantly destroyed. The sky was filled with flying swords with unimaginable power. Even if Jingjio was carrying Ada, it was impossible for him to block it, and he was about to be cut into pieces. Jingjio did not seem to know that the hundreds of flying swords were about to fall, and still carried the cat to the edge of the cliff. Suddenly, a light mirror appeared in the sky. This light mirror was so large that it enshrouded the entire Tianguang Peak. Although it was called a light mirror, it was not transparent, and it gave people a deep feeling. The surface of the light mirror was flowing with countless golden characters of scriptures. No, it should be said that it was flowing like a body. A tranquil and profound Zen will appeared among the peaks. A loud bang resounded. The light mirror blocked Fang Jingtian's like a year sword. The wind howled in the sky, the clouds scattered, and even the great formation of Aoyama was forced to show itself. The hundreds of flying swords that came from the elders and disciples of Aoyama also fell on the light mirror like a storm, giving off a thunderous sound. The golden characters of scriptures on the light mirror glowed brightly, and the hundreds of flying swords were knocked away. Grunts could be heard all over the peaks. Fang Jingtian's body swayed slightly, and his face paled. Even a connecting heaven state like him was at a disadvantage. What kind of treasure of Zen sect was that light mirror? He looked at a certain place in the sky and shouted sternly, "Does Zen Master want to protect this sword demon?" At some point, Zen Master had already left the cloud platform and came to his own lotus throne. He sat beside the lotus, his bare feet stretched out in the clouds, and his eyes were clear and innocent, like a playful child. However, the small mirror of light in his hand gave off an extremely terrifying feeling. You don't believe that he is the spiritual master of Jingyang. Zen Master looked at Fang Jingtian and said, "But I believe him." The peaks of Aoyama fell silent once more. The flying swords that had been preparing to attack Jingjio also gradually stopped. It was common knowledge that the spiritual master of Jingyang did not have many friends, the only exception being the Zen master of Guocheng Temple. The two had once discussed the Tao for 100 days at Shenma Peak, and their relationship was like that of a teacher and a friend. If one were to ask who was most familiar with the spiritual master of Jingyang, besides Yuan Qijing and Fang Jingtian, it would be him. His opinion was of course very important and would affect the judgment of many people. Fang Jingtian extended his hand to call back the time sword and expressionlessly said, "This demon has seized Martial Uncle Jing's soul and memories, so it is naturally very similar to Martial Uncle. Zen Master, do not be deceived by it." Zen Master laughed as if he had heard the most interesting thing in the world and said, "You think I will be deceived?" Guoqing Temple was most skilled in the two minds connection. This was something that everyone knew. Fang Jingtian's expression was rather unsightly, and he said, "This is, after all, the internal affairs of our Aoyama sect. I ask that Zen Master not interfere." Zen Master's smile faded, and he sternly said, "You are wrong. Anything related to the spiritual master of Jingyang is a matter of the world, and anyone can interfere." Enough. Yuan Qijing's cold and stern voice echoed among the peaks. Looking at Jingjio, who had already walked to the edge of the cliff, he said after a moment of silence, Please rest outside the mountain for a while, but don't go too far." Fang Jingtian's eyes turned cold, and he asked, "What are you going to do, brother?" "I am the sword justice of Aoyama," Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly. "I don't need your permission to do anything." This was the rule of Aoyama. Even though Fang Jingtian was already a figure in the heavenly arrival state, he had no reason and no right to overturn Yuan Qijing's decision. Fang Jingtian stared into his eyes and said, Zen Master also said that anything related to martial uncle is a matter of the world. I'm afraid that you alone can't decide this matter. If what the young Zen Master said was sensible, what Jingjiu said was also sensible. The choice of the sect master was indeed an internal affair of the Aoyama sect, and other sects had no right to interfere. But if the new sect master of Aoyama was a demon who colluded with the underworld, it would be a threat to the human race. How could other sects ignore it? Fang Jingtian's intention was clear. Now that Yuan Qijing chose not to discuss this matter, he had no choice but to make it known to the whole cultivation circle. Countless gazes were fixed on the cloud platforms in all directions. The first to express his opinion was the leader of Ozawa, who didn't have much of a presence. The benevolent-looking tall man with long hair draped over his shoulders shook his head and said, "We have no objection." This was a neutral position. The sect master of the Mirror sect gave the same opinion after taking a look at Kane Yang. He was inclined to believe that Jingjiu was the all-in-one sword, but who could be sure? And the relationship between the Mirror sect and the immortal Jingjiu had been quite good lately. The sects in the south that had the best relationship with the Aoyama sect were the Ozawa, the Mirror sect, the Platonist sect, and the No Mercy sect. The No Mercy sect was sealing off their mountains, so the Platonist sect was the next to express their opinion. Sitting in the wheelchair, Chun Xueqiao looked at the man in white clothing on the top of Tingguang Peak and said with a sweet smile, "We of course trust the sect master Jing." Sensei felt helpless and turned her head around to avoid looking at her mother. The Duke of E stood up and looked at Yuan Qijing, Fang Jingtian, and the others. He said respectfully and frankly, "Whether the immortal sect master is the reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang or the all-in-one sword is a demon, I can't tell with my mortal eyes. But, to tell the truth, I'm not worried at all. It's because the Emperor's decree states clearly that the sect master of Aoyama is the immortal Jingjiu." Hearing this, the crowd came back to their senses after a moment of bewilderment and understood what he meant. It was true. It didn't matter whether the immortal Jingyang took the sword or the sword demon took the spirit. As long as Jingjiu was still the same Jingjiu, it was enough. It was because the person the Emperor recognized was Jingjiu. Chapter 581. This state duke, who had always kept a low profile, made such a statement and provided a new explanation, which made some people ponder over it. What made more people ponder over was the relationship between the Emperor and Jingjiu. Zhaoga City still gave Jingjiu their unwavering support during the civil strife in Aoyama that day, and the situation was extremely complicated. Why? In the past 600 years, Zhaoga City and the entire Jing dynasty had been under the influence of the Zhongzhou school. But the situation had suddenly changed in recent decades. First of all, Jing Xian, who was supported by the Zhongzhou school, had been defeated many times in the succession of the throne. In the end, Jing Yao, who was supported by the Aoyama sect, was appointed as the crown prince. The whole of the cultivation circle was well aware of when the change started and who caused it. The most important person was Jingjiu. Countless gazes were fixed on the cloud platform where the Zhongzhou school was located. The Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect had been at odds for many years, so they were happy to see the chaos. Baijiren wouldn't allow Yuan Qijing to let Jingjiu go. The Kunlun sect and the Aoyama sect had a grudge against each other, and the other sects in the north followed the Zhongzhou school's lead. Would the civil strife in Aoyama become another major war in the cultivation circle of Chaotian? Bai Zhao lifted her head and looked at her mother's profile, trying to figure out what she was thinking. Yet, her face was still shrouded by a layer of fog, so she couldn't see through it even though she was her own daughter. Bai Jinren, of course, hoped that there would be a civil strife in Aoyama, but she was fully aware that it would not happen that day. If she hadn't come here in person, it might have been possible. She was quite satisfied with the outcome. The crack in Aoyama grew deeper and deeper, and it would become a natural barrier one day, making it impossible for the two sides to communicate with each other. This would be the beginning of the decline of Aoyama. Who would have thought that the words of the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanchu, would be applied to Jingjiu? As expected, when all eyes fell on Bai Junren, the flying swords at the top of Tianguang Peak suddenly retracted without a sound. No matter how fierce the internal conflict in Aoyama was, no matter whether Jingjiu was a sword monster or not, the disciples of Aoyama were naturally aware of the pressure from Zhongzhou school. Yuan Qijing took a deep look at Fang Jingtian. Fang Jingtian knew that the outcome was set in stone, and he could not ask for more. It was already a victory for him to chase the sword monster out of Aoyama. But what about the two items? Elder Mo Chi sighed and handed the unconscious Bai Rujing to a disciple. He walked out of the crowd, looked at Jingjiu, and said, "Please leave the inherited heaven sword." Like most of the elders and disciples of Aoyama, Mo Chi believed that Jingjiu was the sword monster, but in his opinion, Jingjiu didn't even understand it himself. He didn't hate Jingjiu, but Jingjiu had just told Fang Jingtian that he couldn't keep him here, and he had to ask the inherited heaven sword in the end. Fang Jingtian couldn't ask Jingjiu again, so he had to come out and ask. Gu Qing turned around and said calmly and mildly, "Elder Mo Chi, my master is just out of the mountains to recuperate for a while." Though he didn't finish his sentence, the meaning was clear. What Yuan Qijing said was that Jingjiu was out of the mountains to recuperate, but it didn't mean that Jingjiu was no longer the sect master of Aoyama. As such, he didn't have to hand over the inherited heaven sword and the seal of the king of the underworld. Mo Chi was taken aback, but he thought what Jingjiu said made sense. He sighed again and stepped back. Gu Qing turned around and handed the sword of the universe to Jingjiu. Zhao Liu glanced at him and said, "We're leaving now." Looking at Zhao Liu, Fang Jingtian said in a deep voice, "You're the master of the Shinma Peak, but now you want to leave with this monster. Are you planning to betray the mountain gate? You and I are both the peak masters of Aoyama. What right do you have to control me?" Zhao Liu retorted with an indifferent expression. "You want to control me? Get the inherited heaven sword first." "You want the inherited heaven sword? No way. As for betrayal, I've only known that the immortal Jingyang is in Aoyama since I was little." Zhao Liu looked at Fang Jingtian and those disciples of Aoyama who had attacked them with their swords, and said expressionlessly, "That's why you're the traitors." The ocean of clouds outside the Tianguang Peak was usually higher and flatter than in other places, probably for the convenience of someone with long legs. Today, the immortal Tai Lu's sword will penetrate heaven and earth, and then Fang Jingtian's old-time sword blotted out the sky. The ocean of clouds rippled and turned into countless small clusters. Between those clusters of clouds, the scenery of Aoyama could be seen clearly. The sword-washing stream meandered among the peaks toward the outside of the mountain. That was the way to leave. Jingjiu sat on the sword of the universe. Yes, even though he was pointed out by Fang Jingtian, he still chose to sit on the sword. A blood-red line pierced through the sky. The thoughtless sword left Zhao Liu and flew toward the Shinma Peak. The next moment, the restrictive formation on the Shinma Peak was opened and the sword will burst out. Having done this, Zhao Liu also sat on the sword of the universe. Her movements were smooth, and her position was similar to that of sitting on the bamboo chair. Yuan Chu hastily took out the strange gray sword that he had just obtained, but he found it difficult to sit on it, so he had no choice but to stand on it. The two flying swords left the top of the Tianguang Peak and flew toward the blue sky and white clouds at a leisurely pace. They were not being expelled. They were leaving. Gu Qing took 2 steps toward the cliff's edge and waved his hand as a farewell. In the crowd on the peak, Sister Yushan also waved her hand discreetly. Some young disciples of Aoyama dared not do anything, but they silently said, "Take care." Mei Li and Lin Wuji looked at each other, feeling sentimental. Qin Yutian suddenly felt an emptiness in his heart, as if something was missing. Then he remembered the great ancestor had also been taken away from Aoyama. Only Zhuo Ruzhui was concerned about something else. Looking at the sword that Yuan Chu was stepping on, he said while stroking his chin, "Not bad." The 2 flying swords flew toward the outside of Aoyama. Though they were not very fast, It didn't take long for them to become two black dots. Looking at the scene in the distance, Fang Jingtian was silent. After so many years of preparation and so much evidence, why did it end up like this? You don't understand why Taiping Jinren couldn't defeat him, Zen Master said. Other than what immortal Jingyang said, I think there is another important reason. His words seemed to be directed at Fang Jingtian, but in fact, it was also directed at the disciples of Aoyama and everyone present. Taiping Jinren's wisdom is unparalleled, his temperament is extraordinary, and he has countless supporters. Immortal Jingyang doesn't even have a few friends, so why has he never truly lost? Because Taiping Jinren has disciples and subordinates, while immortal Jingyang has people who agree with his ideals. Zen Master said, the world is a community, so how can the world not help him? Fang Jingtian's white eyebrows fluttered as he mocked. Even if he is Uncle Master Jingyang, using the words the world as a community to describe him is a bit too ridiculous. Everyone knew that immortal Jingyang didn't care about the affairs of the world. He only knew how to cultivate in seclusion, thinking about ascension. No matter what happened in the world, he didn't care. Even the Aoyama sect didn't seem to care, which was why the juniors of Aoyama complained. How could such a person be called a community? A word from Taiping Jinren and immortal Jingyang is like thunder. A sword moves the world, and a thought decides the life and death of millions. Zen Master said, people like them don't do anything. That's the only way to be fair to all living beings. Zen Master's voice echoed among the mountains of Aoyama. It would definitely be remembered for many years. The scene of the two flying swords slowly leaving the mountains of Aoyama would definitely be remembered by the world of cultivation for many years to come. Jing Jiao sat on the sword of the universe. His eyes were empty. His white robe fluttered. A sense of loneliness arose naturally. He was like a real immortal. Thinking of this scene and Zen Master's words, many disciples of Aoyama and cultivators from other sects were suddenly shaken. Could he really be immortal Jingyang? Right now, the loneliest person on Tianguang Peak was Apiao. If he could be counted as a human being. After Apiao finished talking about Taiping Jinren, no one paid attention to him. Whether it was the swords moving Aoyama or Zen Master's words moving the mountains, he just floated in the air alone. No one even looked at him. He was a bit anxious, thinking that this wasn't the plan. Shouldn't Jing Jiao be imprisoned in the sword jail, and then his master's disciples would fight to reclaim the orthodoxy of Aoyama? If that was the case, he would be protected by Aoyama. Why would he be like this, a dead man with no one looking at him? Yes, he was the disciple of the royal family of the underworld, and also the successor of Taiping Jinren. His fate had been decided. Just like a letter that was opened and read, the ending was often forgotten in the pile of old papers or directly thrown into the garbage or torn to shreds. The worst was, of course, being burned to ashes. But it was obvious that he didn't have the self-awareness of being a letter. Let Yamatai deal with this sorcerer. Bu Qiuxiao walked to the edge of the cloud platform and said to Yuan Qijing seriously. There were 2 times when he was ready to use the Dragontail Inkstone to suppress Jing Jiao. But he hesitated because of what Zen Master said. He didn't strike in the end, but he would never let this underworld sorcerer go. No matter if he has forsaken the darkness for the light or not. This is Aoyama after all. Fang Jingtian said to him calmly. If Apiao was the successor of Taiping Jinren, he would be his young brother. He couldn't let Yamatai take him away no matter what. The violent wind and snow suddenly enshrouded the top of Tianguang Peak. The cold intent was bone-piercing, like the will of the sword. A moment later, the wind and snow abruptly stopped. An ice cube of 5 square feet appeared on the ground, emitting a blue glow, looking like a huge sapphire. Apiao was frozen inside the ice cube, her eyes wide open and her mouth agape, showing a terrified expression on her face. Yuan Qijing was in a bad mood that day, so he struck out angrily. How many people in the world could resist him? Since it happened in Aoyama, he has to be locked in the sword jail of Aoyama, Yuan Qijing said to Bu Qiuxiao. Bu Qiuxiao furrowed his eyebrows slightly. After the death of the old dragon, the fiend prison had lost its former power. The most heavily guarded place in the orthodox cultivation circle was, of course, the sword jail of Aoyama. It shouldn't be a problem for this disciple of the royal family of the underworld to be locked in the sword jail, but there had been a bad precedent in the sword jail in recent years. Thinking of this, Yuan Qijing turned around and glanced at his student. Lu Shisui didn't notice that his teacher was looking at him. He was still staring at the ocean of clouds, speechless and bewildered, looking rather pitiful. Bu Qiuxiao felt a bit soft-hearted. "Go ahead," he said after a sigh. Lu Shisui came back to his senses after being taken aback for a moment, feeling overjoyed. Dozens of young disciples of Aoyama gathered together, most of whom were disciples of Liangwang Peak. Lei Il-kyung, Yao Songzhan, and other disciples looked at each other in silence, none of them willing to move their gazes away. Guananshan didn't heed them. He walked to the side of Zhuozhui and looked at the outside of Aoyama together with him, asking, "What do you think?" "I can't see it clearly," replied Zhuozhui. He wasn't sure whether Jingjiu was the senior grandmaster Jingyang or the legendary Devil Sword. "What do you think?" asked Guananshan. Zhuozhui fell silent for a while before saying, "I don't know. Do you want to go?" asked Guananshan. Zhuozhui said with drooping eyelids, "In fact, I don't really want to go. I'm used to it." Guananshan sighed and said, "Let's go then." Chapter 582. Whether Jingjiu was the immortal Jingyang or the all-in-one sword, between the two sects of Aoyama, the latter had an overwhelming advantage. The disciples of Liangwang Peak also had to make their own choices. Guananshan thought that Jingjiu was the devil sword, but what if he was the Grandmaster Jingyang? It was well known that Jingjiu was the peak master of Tiangwang Peak. The people of Shima Peak all followed Jingjiu, but none of them went to Tiangwang Peak. It didn't feel right at all. It was not necessarily a bad thing for Zhuozhui to go to Tiangwang Peak with Jingjiu. At least they had a chance to make up for it in the future. He warned in a low voice, "Don't let too many people see you." Zhuozhui uttered him. In addition to Apyao, who was frozen into a blue gem, there was another person on Tiangwang Peak that attracted the most attention. There were fewer people on Shinma Peak than monkeys. Zhao Leiyu and Yuan Chu left with Jingjiu, and Ping Yongka stayed on Sword Peak, leaving only Gu Qing. For some reason, he didn't leave Aoyama with the others. An elder of Shilai Peak looked at him and asked indifferently, "What are you doing here?" Gu Qing said mildly, "Shima Peak needs someone to take care of it. If there is any urgent matter that needs to be dealt with by the sect master, I can convey it to him in time." Hearing this, the others felt it was ridiculous, thinking that Jingjiu had left Aoyama and lost his protection. He might be assassinated by someone one day, and it was impossible for him to return to Aoyama. He claimed that he was still the sect master of Aoyama. Do you think he could continue to be the sect master? Gu Qing didn't think it was ridiculous. After Jingjiu left, someone had to guard Shima Peak and Aoyama. Zhao Leiyu glanced at him before leaving, which was what she meant. This was tacit understanding. When Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu traveled the world, it was Gu Qing who guarded Shima Peak. At that time, he wasn't even a direct disciple. He was just a tenant. How absurd. Hui's cold voice came from the sky. "You're the disciple of that sword demon. How are you qualified to stay in Aoyama?" Since when did the matters of Aoyama fall under the jurisdiction of Kunlun? Guananshan and other disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't care that this person was the sect master of Kunlun. They looked at him with eyes as sharp as swords. Fang Jingtian raised his eyebrows. Gu Qing smiled and didn't mind. He knew what he would have to endure if he stayed in Aoyama, and he was prepared to endure the humiliation for decades. It was then that Zhuozhui came to his side and said, "Let's go together. There's no point in staying here and pretending to be a lonely subject. It's meaningless." After a moment of silence, Gu Qing said, "You have a point. I'm a cultivation practitioner after all." Zhuozhui said in a mocking tone, "You're quick to step down. If you want to leave, just say so. There's no need to put on a show." Gu Qing didn't dare to say this to Senior Master Leiyu, so he said, I don't have a sword again. Zhuo Rizhui called out the swallowing boat sword and said, "This is the second time you've used a sword." Gu Qing said calmly, "Spit out the beef and mutton, tripe, green garlic, and the energy of heaven and earth." 4 years ago, when Jing Jiao went to the North Cold Sea to hunt down Taiping Zhenren, they went back to Aoyama first. Gu Qing didn't have a sword back then, so he and Zhuo Rizhui had to squeeze on the swallowing boat sword all the way. The swallowing boat sword was like a salted fish, not spacious enough, but they had traveled tens of thousands of miles together, so they could arrange each other's positions skillfully. Seeing that, no, that gray flying sword flying slowly toward the outskirts of Aoyama, the elders and disciples of Aoyama were all stunned. It was obvious that the gray flying sword was going after Jing Jiao and the others. Zhuo Rizhui was the most favored personal disciple of the immortal Lu Xi, but he was going to leave as well. Guan Nanshan smiled bitterly, thinking that they had agreed not to let too many people see him. Zhuo Rizhui's departure was like a flame falling into a barrel of oil. Yao Songshan and Lei Ilqiang walked out of the crowd almost at the same time. They knelt down in front of Yuan Qijing and asked to leave. Then, more and more young disciples showed up. There were at least a dozen of them, and they all expressed the same wish. Junior sister Yushan widened her eyes, thinking that this was possible. She subconsciously looked at her master, Qi Yin. Qi Yin knew about her relationship with Shenma Peak, and he knew what she wanted to do. His face darkened, and he said, "Go back to the peak and copy the record of mind capture twice." Junior sister Yushan replied with a wronged, "Oh," and stood back obediently. The young disciples of Aoyama did not get the same treatment as Zhuo Rizhui. "What are you talking about? Don't cause any more trouble." Yuan Qijing scolded coldly and ordered the masters to bring the young disciples back. Jing Jiao left Aoyama. He left with the inherited heaven sword, the seal of the king of the underworld, Zhao Liu, Yuan Chu, Gu Qing, Zhuo Rizhui, and many other young disciples. Only these young people left with him, but they were the future of Aoyama. Then the representatives of Ozawa, Platana sect, and other sects also left with a lot of emotions. No matter whether the young master of Aoyama was the reincarnation of immortal Jingyang or the all-in-one sword, he was the top existence in Aoyama. Would his departure lead to the division of Aoyama, or even the division? Of course, this was based on the fact that he could continue to live, and he had to live for a few more years. The small green, curtained sedan flew toward the outside of the mountain, followed by the pair of master and disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery. Yuan Qijing had a general idea of what Jing Jiao had done, so he wouldn't blame Shui Yu Nunnery for what had happened to Apiao. Shui Yu Nunnery hadn't spoken a word from beginning to end that day. It wasn't until they left Aoyama that she suddenly said to Zheng Tao, "You should go and have a look when you have time." Zheng Tao knew what her master meant, but she didn't understand why she was asked to go. She nodded in bewilderment. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school was the last to leave Aoyama. Before leaving, Bai Jinren said to Yuan Qijing, "Everybody knows that the person who came out from the fiend prison is him. The Cloud Dream sect can't pretend to be deaf and dumb anymore, and we have to do something for the old dragon. If he leaves Aoyama, we will find a way to kill him. After all, he is merely a devil." Yuan Qijing didn't say anything. Soon after the cloud boat entered the territory of Yu County, Xiang Wanshu knelt down in front of Bai Jinren, saying nervously, "Big sister is missing." Bai Jinren's reaction was quite strange. It was because she was very calm. Yuan Qijing returned to the Shangda Peak. He brought the blue ice cube to the bottom of the well and threw it into a corner. The blue block of ice hit the stone wall and bounced a few times before stopping, letting out a crisp sound. It was as if it was made of gold and stone. One could imagine how hard it was and how cold it was. Apiao was frozen in the ice cube, head up and feet down. She looked terrible, but the glow in her eyes hadn't disappeared yet. It looked like she was still alive. There was an endless cold source at the bottom of the Shangda Peak. If the blue ice cube was stored here, it would never melt. It was unclear how long he would be frozen in the ice cube. Let him live. Someone might want him in the future, Yuan Qijing said to the dead dog. The expression in the eyes of the dead dog was still as warm and nonchalant as before. Though it looked calm, it could convey many meanings. He had no interest in this little royal member of the underworld, and only cared about one thing. Was Jing Jiao a human being or a sword? I don't know, Yuan Qijing said after a moment of silence. Maybe he doesn't even know. Though he hated his master the most, he had to admit that what Taiping Jinren asked Apia to say was probably true. The dead dog lifted his head slowly and looked at the sunlight above. Even if he is the all-in-one and has inherited the spiritual soul and memories of the senior master, he is merely a second senior master in my eyes, as long as the senior master isn't killed by him. Yuan Qijing said, "It's better than calling him the great ancestor." The dead dog pulled back his gaze and looked at Yuan Qijing in silence to show his agreement. A principal guard who had lived in Aoyama for a great many years would feel it odd when he suddenly found a divine object of a higher status and older than him. Yuan Qijing sighed and said, "Regardless of whether he is the senior master or the all-in-one, he is left." The dead dog showed an apologetic expression in his eyes. If he hadn't ignored him on purpose, Fang Jingtian wouldn't have brought the immortal Tai Lu out of the sword jail. It's been a few years, but he hasn't asked me for the great formation of Aoyama, and he didn't ask us to do anything this time to take the opportunity to leave. I think he's tired of it. After a moment of silence, Yuan Qijing suddenly sneered, "No, I think he's being lazy again." The gray swallowing boat sword flew slowly toward the outside of the peaks. Fortunately, the sword of the universe flew even slower, so it didn't take long for it to catch up with it. Yuan Chu turned around and found it was Zhuo Ruzhui, but he didn't feel surprised. "You are here," he said. In the next moment, he saw Gu Qing behind Zhuo Ruzhui, asking in surprise, "Big brother, aren't you going to take care of the house?" Zhao Liu was puzzled as well, shooting a glance at Gu Qing. Gu Qing uttered before saying, "The Shenma Peak has been sealed off, so there shouldn't be anything serious. It's more important for me to take care of my master." Jing Jiao didn't turn around. He sat at the front of the sword of the universe, looking like a shepherd boy sitting on the back of an ox, saying, "That's right. There is nothing in this world that can't be let go." Hearing this obvious pun, Zhuo Ruzhui thought that Gu Qing wouldn't dare let go of so many things that he had given to him. After the brief conversation, the 3 swords and 5 others had passed the sword-washing stream in the sky. They had passed through the great formation of Aoyama easily by relying on the command boards. The world here was real, but it was also a bit surreal because the weather was too good. The sky was blue, and the sun was red. It felt warm and comfortable when it shone on people's faces. It didn't look like winter at all. Zhuo Ruzhui looked at the red sun with narrowed eyes, thinking of the unknown road ahead after leaving Aoyama. He didn't feel perplexed. Instead, he felt a boundless heroic spirit. Just like in the Guocheng temple years ago, when he saw the cloud boat competing with the setting sun, he thought heroically, "What's the big deal about starting a war with the Zhongzhou school?" Looking at the distance ahead, he said sentimentally, "What's there to be afraid of even if we have to go to the ends of the world?" Gu Qing glanced at him and said, "We're almost there." The sword lights illuminated Cloudy Town. Jing Jiao and the others arrived at the restaurant. Zhuo Ruzhui didn't understand Gu Qing's words, thinking that it was indeed the tradition of the Shenma Peak that one should have a hot pot before doing anything important. The red soup and the white soup boiled one after another, and all kinds of dishes jumped into the pot as if they were thrown into a river. The crowd was either eating or watching in silence. No one spoke. The atmosphere was a bit depressing. Zhuo Ruzhui thought that he should figure out where to go first. He had eaten 7 plates of the most delicious and tender mutton and found a few alternatives. Since he was expelled from Aoyama, he had to go somewhere far away. But where was the safest place to go? The cultivation circle was certain that Jing Jiao was a sword devil, and he was a heavenly treasure himself, not to mention the precious magic treasures. Even though many cultivation sects didn't dare do anything because of the attitude of Zen Master in Zhaoga City, those devil men of the deviant sects and the Zhongzhou school wouldn't let them off easily. The best answer was the alien land, but it was too far away, and the godly swordsmen of West Ocean might be there as well. It would be a lucky encounter if they met each other. White Town was also a good place. With the support of Zen Master and the attitude of the Broadsword King, it was safe there. However, it was too cold there, and the spiritual energy was thin. Most importantly, it was too close to the Snowland. If the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom went south, or if a monster invasion occurred again, it would be troublesome. It was better to go to the Guocheng Temple directly. He hadn't hugged that stone pagoda for many years. Rujui said it out loud as he thought of all this. Gu Qing shot him a glance, thinking that he had already said it out loud. Zhao Liu said, "We won't go anywhere else. We'll stay right here." Zhuo Rujui had finally understood what they meant. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word, as if he was about to eat another 7 plates of fresh mutton. There was a small mountain outside Cloudy Town, on which some residential houses and some farmlands were scattered. 4 years ago, these residential houses and farmlands were bought by a mysterious buyer, and they were renovated soundlessly. In the end, a large manor house was built. When the manor house was built, it was protected from sight by a formation, and the clouds and fog lingered all year round. As a result, not many people knew about its existence. The sword light illuminated the front of the mountain, and the clouds and fog dispersed, exposing the true appearance of the manor house. There was a brook in the manor house, and there were flowering trees by the brook. The fog flowed along with the water, and the pavilions were faintly discernible. It was like a fairyland. Looking at the scenery in front of him, Zhu Rujui opened his eyes wide. He was not as tired as he usually was. He said in shock, "4 years ago, you were ready to leave?" Jing Jiu responded with an Everyone at the Shinma Peak knew what he was thinking, or at least they could guess what he was thinking. 4 years ago, he asked the Gu family to build this manor house, and he also informed Yuan Qijing to hold the grand ceremony of the sect master 4 years later. It was obvious that he was ready to leave. Zhuo couldn't understand it, thinking that even if he had arranged it, he was still banished from Aoyama, but after he left Aoyama, he had to live in Cloudy Town, which was so close. Didn't he feel ashamed? The scene of a stray dog lingering in a nearby alley was too tragic. Jing Jiu didn't feel ashamed. Cloudy Town was very close to Aoyama, and it was the safest place to live. Zhuo Rujui believed that Guocheng Temple and Zen Master would protect him, but he trusted Aoyama the most. Even though most of the elders and disciples believed that he was the sword devil who killed Jingyang, as long as Yuan Qijing was alive, he would not let Aoyama do anything to him. But at this moment, they suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. The thoughtless sword flew out soundlessly, drawing a straight red line in front of them. On the other side of the red line was the front door of the manor house. A young girl stood in front of the door. The young girl's short skirt was fluttering, and silver bells were ringing all over her body. Even though she was expressionless, she still looked cute and adorable. She stared at Jing Jiu with eyes full of killing intent. Nan Wang, it seemed that he still couldn't forget it. Chapter 583. So many things had happened in the grand ceremony of the sect master of Aoyama that day that many people had neglected another strange event. That was the peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang, hadn't spoken a single word from beginning to end. She either looked at the distance or turned her back to them. Few people had even seen her face. She shouldn't have behaved so nonchalantly, no matter whether she was the most favored young sister of the immortal Lu Si's generation or the rumored unruly princess of the South, who hated senior master, Jingyang the most. Unexpectedly, she had followed Jing Jiu in secret and was the first one to come to the gate. Gu Qing, Rujui, and Yuan Shu didn't know what had happened in the past, and they didn't understand why she stood in front of the gate. All they knew was that she exuded a dangerous aura, so they couldn't help but be alarmed, wondering if she was going to kill Jing Jiu with her own hands to wash away the humiliation of Aoyama. Nan Wang turned around and walked toward the small courtyard. Jing Jiu waved his hand to dismantle the formation and followed her into the small courtyard. Zhao Liu drew back the thoughtless sword, motioning for the others to stay where they were and not to disturb them. Rujui and the others didn't understand. Wine and Wang didn't fear that something might happen to her, since the murderous intent on her was so obvious. Ada, of course, wanted to stay, but he was pressed tightly in Jing Jiu's bosom. The fur around his neck was grasped so tightly by Jing Jiu that his face was deformed, and his eyes were tilted upward, showing a frivolous expression. Gu Qing walked to the side of Zhao Liu, feeling worried and wanting to know what was going on. Boom! A sudden clap of thunder startled him. The clap of thunder didn't come from the sky, but from the deep end of the courtyard. Though it was loud, it wasn't muffled, but rather crisp. Gu Qing looked at the deep end of the courtyard in shock, wondering what was going on. A cloud of smoke rose up in the deep end of the courtyard, making people feel uneasy. This manor house was built by the Gu clan, and the marvelous formation that drew in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth by means of the mountain stream was designed by Jing Jiu, and the defensive formation was designed by Gu Qing himself. Gu Qing had learned the inherited heaven sword style for many years. Though he was not as good as Zhu Rujui and Lu Shisui, he had spent a few years setting up the formation, so it was still quite strong. With the protection of the array formation, the three-story wooden building in the depths of the courtyard did not completely collapse. Only half of it collapsed. The formation gradually disappeared and the dust settled, revealing the scene on the field. Jing Jiu stood in front of the collapsed wooden building. His whole body was covered in sawdust, and he looked extremely pathetic. The most embarrassing part was his face. He had the most perfect face in the world. Even his enemies couldn't help but admit that it was a true work of art and couldn't bear to hurt it. However, at this moment, a very clear palm print appeared on his face, and the red mark was slowly fading away. It was obvious that he had been slapped by Nan Wang. Ruthlessly. Why didn't you hide from me? Do you feel ashamed of me? Nan Wang asked expressionlessly. She was the last disciple of Taiping Zhenren and the true god worshipped by the Southern Man tribe. She had an amazing talent. Recently, she had started to cultivate seriously and entered the peak of the Broken Sea state in a few years, and tied with Shui Yununri. If she hadn't fallen in love, she wouldn't have stagnated for so many years. It's not that I feel guilty. It's you. A teenager appeared in front of Jing Jiu. The teenager liked to sit on the edge of the cliff and swing his long legs. Many years ago, the teenager was very fat, but he gradually lost weight. The whole of Oyama knew why. Then why didn't you let him marry me? Nan Wang was still expressionless, staring at Jing Jiu without blinking her eyes. It was unclear whether it was because she had stared at him for too long or for other reasons, but her eyes turned red slowly. Jing Jiu said, Lucy I likes you, but you don't like him. How can you be his cultivation companion? Nan Wang said loudly, I told you at the time that I like him. Jing Jiu said after a moment of silence, you want to marry him just to annoy me. Of course I won't agree. You don't want to marry me, and you don't allow me to marry anyone. That's too domineering. Nan Wang couldn't stand it anymore, and raised her hand to slap him again. Jing Jiu stood where he was without any intention of dodging or raising his cat. He just looked at her in silence. Maybe he couldn't bear to do it, or maybe he thought that she was his senior uncle. Nan Wang's second slap didn't land on his face. It turned into a small fist and landed on his chest. There was a loud bang. The wind howled, and the remaining 3 floors of the wooden building all collapsed. Dust and smoke rose. Outside the courtyard, Gu Qing, Rujui, and Yuan Chu heard the thunder and felt the vibration under their feet. They were startled again. They looked at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu closed her eyes, sitting on the ground and cultivating. She didn't pay any attention to what was happening in the courtyard. The dust settled again. A large pit, several feet deep, appeared in front of the ruins of the wooden building. Nan Wang cried, Only my senior brother spoiled me, and you didn't let me marry him. Now look, he's dead. You become like this, and I'm still alone. Are you satisfied now? How could you be so cruel? Jing Jiu stood at the bottom of the pit, covered in mud. His white robe was full of holes, and he looked extremely miserable. Ada wasn't lifted up to resist, so he was quite satisfied. But he didn't have the slightest sympathy for Jingjiu. He just raised his head and looked at Nan Wang, who was crying like a fool, thinking how pitiful the little girl was. Jingjiu didn't say anything, not because he was lazy or indifferent, but because he really didn't know what to say. It was quiet for a long time. The tears and emotions on Nan Wang's face were all blown away by the wind, leaving only a trace of sadness on her face. She asked, "You've never liked me, have you?" Jingjiu thought for a while and answered, "I like mountains, rivers, and everything in the universe. Of course, you are one of them." Ada raised his head and glanced at him, wondering what he was doing. "Pooh!" Nan Wang spat at the bottom of the pit and said, "But I don't like you anymore. You look so ugly." Having said that, she raised her arm to wipe the non-existent tears off her face and turned around to leave. Standing at the bottom of the pit in silence for a while, Jingjiu asked, "Is my face still ugly?" Ada sighed, thinking that Jingjiu had become more normal when he heard Jingjiu talking about mountains, rivers, and everything in the universe. It turned out that Jingjiu was still the same as before. It wasn't a matter of face at all. No matter how beautiful your face is, it's not the face that Jingyang used to have. But since you said you liked her, why did you treat her coldly for hundreds of years? Was it because she liked drinking and singing when she drank too much? Hearing Ada's voice in his spiritual awareness, Jingjiu said, "Since we will part in the end, why do we have to be together in the beginning?" Ada was speechless again, thinking that what Jingjiu had said and what he had said before were too romantic. It didn't sound like what Jingjiu would say. Jingjiu didn't know what was on Ada's mind. He carried him back to the courtyard and said, "It's not good to be greedy." Ada wondered who Jingjiu was talking about. He ignored him and went to the eaves to bathe in the sun and calm his breath. He swallowed by Rujing's flying sword on the top of Tianguang Peak. Even though he was in the heavenly arrival state against someone in the broken sea state, he still had some hidden dangers. Jingjiu said it was not good to be greedy. Was this what he meant? The bright sunlight shone on the courtyard, making the three-story wooden building in ruins stand out, or in other words, dazzling. He stood by the ruins in silence for a while and waved his sleeves to send the broken beams and stones out of the courtyard. The Gu family received the news and sent the most capable people to the outside of Cloudy Town as soon as possible to start the cleaning work. More than 10 big formations with magic treasures kept transporting the garbage. It didn't take long for the cleaning work to be done. It was the third master of the Gu family who was in charge of the cleaning work. Seeing the ground at the downstream of the stream became empty again, he finally felt relieved. Then he started to think about what kind of flowers and trees he should plant. He didn't know the real situation of this courtyard. He only knew that it was the order of the one in the mountain, so the family had to treat it as the most important thing. But he didn't know why he felt something was wrong. The reason why the Gu family could leap from a medium family to one of the big families in Tianan 100 years ago was not because of Gu Han, the old master's favorite, but because of Gu Qing, the son of a concubine. To be more precise, it was because of Gu Qing's master. Could it be that something went wrong over there? The third master of the Gu family was a bit worried, but then he felt his worry was ridiculous. That was the sect master of Aoyama. What could happen? Zhao Leu walked into the courtyard with the other three people. She saw the big pit at first glance, and then pretended not to see it. Jingjiu had taken out a bamboo chair and was lying under the eaves, looking quite relaxed. Zhao Leu walked to the eaves and knelt down. It was the first time she knelt down in front of others. Gu Qing quickly knelt down as well, and Yuan Chu kowtowed a few times. Master was master, Uncle Master was Uncle Master, but to the disciples of Aoyama, the name Jingyang was the most special. Perhaps it was because of this that Zhuo Ruzhui knelt down very quickly today. His sincerity was genuine, and there was no pretense. Jingjiu waved for them to get up and asked Zhuo Ruzhui, "Are you going to continue freeloading?" Zhuo Ruzhui looked very innocent and said, "You're the sect master of Aoyama, and also a disciple of Tianguang Peak. Even a drop of water should be distributed fairly. Moreover, your uncle Master Jingyang, and As the most outstanding disciple of the third generation, it's my duty to serve you. Gu Qing knew that his master didn't want to listen to these things, and asked carefully, "Do you want to rearrange the ranking in the sect?" Zhao Lei had the same idea. She had always regarded herself as Jing Jiu's direct disciple, but she didn't make it clear in the past, and could only muddle along. Naturally, she couldn't continue like this now. If the ranking was to be rearranged, then the disciples of Shinma Peak would naturally be counted as Jing Jiu's disciples. Zhao Lei would be the first, Gu Qing the second, Yuan Chu the third, and the little fellow who was forgotten in Yunqing Peak would be the last. Thinking of this possibility, Yuan Chu's expression changed, and he quickly said, "That's not appropriate, is it?" Becoming the direct disciple of Jinren Jingyang was the dream of all cultivators. But the problem was, Zhao Lei was his master. How could she suddenly become the eldest apprentice sister? At this moment, there was a sudden movement outside the courtyard, and the formation sounded a warning. Gu Qing walked out, and not long after, he brought in another person. It was Lu Shui. Zhui exclaimed in surprise, feeling that the commotion was getting more and more exciting, wondering how to arrange the ranking. But Zhao Lei noticed that there were bloodstains on the edge of Lu Shui's sleeves, and she asked what happened. Lu Shui said, "I didn't have a token, so I was delayed when I left the mountain, and then I ran into the people of Kunlun." Why did he have to fight when he ran into the people of Kunlun? Given his temperament, it must be because of Jing Jiu. The courtyard became quiet. Everyone was silent. They left Aoyama, came to Cloudy Town not far away, and settled in this courtyard. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but there were many problems and even dangers waiting for them in the near future. Those problems and dangers were different from those of Nanwang. Zhui suddenly asked, "How did you know we were here?" Lu Shui was taken aback, and then said, "I asked around, and it seems everyone knows." Jing Jiu was not surprised. Who didn't know he was here when there were several thunders and earthquakes? Nanwang did it on purpose. He wanted to disturb him. "I like you girls." Chapter 584. Not having peace and quiet was a small matter. The key was something else. Jing Jiu thought he was still the sect master of Aoyama, but it didn't mean others would think so. He believed that it wouldn't take long before the whole cultivation world knew that he had been banished from Aoyama. The Aoyama sect wouldn't do anything to him when Yuan Shijing was here. But without the protection of the Aoyama sect, what would happen to a monster who had been accused of murdering the immortal Jingyang? Zhao Lei and the others looked at Jing Jiu's face worriedly. Jing Jiu didn't seem to notice it and asked, "Did you lose?" Zhui was surprised to be concerned about such a thing at such a time, but Lu Shui felt it was natural. He said with some shame, "It was an elder of the Kunlun sect who attacked me. My cultivation level was too low, so I couldn't handle it." Everyone knew the relationship between Lu Shui, Jing Jiu, and Aoyama. Moreover, he was Bu Qiuxiao's most valued student, so the Kunlun sect wouldn't go too far. Jing Jiu said, "If I see him, I'll fight him back for you." "Okay," Lu Shui said. Many people thought it was ridiculous for a child to ask his parents for help when he couldn't beat his opponent, but Jing Jiu said it as if it was a matter of course, and Lu Shui responded confidently. Zhui yawned and reconfirmed that Zhao Lei and Lu Shui were still the most favored ones. Yuan Chu was still thinking about the rearrangement of the Shinma Peak, thinking that since Lu Shui was back, who would be the first disciple? Jing Jiu said, "It's too troublesome. Let's do it like before." Zhao Lei thought for a while and said, "Okay." Gu Qing didn't care. Yuan Chu breathed a sigh of relief, feeling much more comfortable this way. Lu Shui had no idea what they were talking about. Zhui thought it was a close call that he had almost become the junior of these people. It was impossible for him to do so. Jing Jiu said that he wanted to rest for a while, so he continued to lie on the bamboo chair. The rest of them walked out. This house was extremely large, and there were at least 20 or so individual courtyards. Naturally, The distribution of the courtyards was not the focus of everyone's attention. You already knew? Zhuo Rizhui looked at Zhao Liu and asked. Zhao Liu uttered him softly. Zhuo Rizhui asked, "When did this happen?" Zhao Liu said, "It's been many years." It had indeed been many years. Although he had never made it clear, Jing Jiao did not hide it from her. Whether it was related to Insan or the past of Aoyama, he always talked to her as Jingyang. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu fixed their gazes on her, feeling a bit jealous. But Lu Shui said sympathetically, "You must be under a lot of pressure, right?" "Not too bad," Zhao Liu said. In the past decades, she was the only one who knew Jing Jiao's real identity. She was indeed under pressure, but more than that, it was the joy and pride of a little girl hiding candy. Zhuo Rizhui was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Actually, have you ever thought?" He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. The riverside became quiet. What Fang Jingtian had said, the immortal Tai Lu's testimony, and especially the blue-clothed boy, Jing Jiao didn't take out the inherited heaven sword until the end. They left Aoyama with Jing Jiao, but those questions were still there, pressing on their hearts like a mountain. What I don't understand the most is, why doesn't Senior Master want to walk on the sword? Yuan Chu kept scratching his head, so distressed that there seemed to be sparks between his fingers. Both the pair of prominent ears and the special body could be explained by the fact that he had been reborn as a sword. But he didn't want to walk on the sword. It was obviously a problem of his consciousness. Back then, he chose Senior Brother Mo's sword because the sword of the universe was wide enough for him to sit on. Zhao Liu walked to a rock by the riverside and sat down. Looking at the river flowing into the distance, she said, "Standing is better than sitting, and sitting is better than lying down." Thinking of the bamboo chair on the top of the Shenma Peak, the others thought it was true. If it weren't for the indecent posture, he could have been the first person in the world to walk on the sword lying down. Zhuo Rizhui also thought it was reasonable. So he continued, "One last question. The all-in-one sword is a heavenly treasure and has its own spirit. If Senior Master borrowed the body of the sword instead of the evil sword itself, where is the spirit of the all-in-one sword?" "I didn't ask, and he didn't tell me." Zhao Liu drew back her line of sight and looked at a crabapple flower floating on the river, saying, "Maybe it was scattered by Run when he ascended." It was quiet by the riverside for a while, probably because of the name Run. What if it isn't? Zhuo Rizhui stared at her back and said, "What if he is really the all-in-one sword, but he doesn't know it?" The stream flowed slowly, emitting a soft sound like countless sighs. "Is it important?" Yuan Chu asked, scratching his head. "I don't care," said Lu Shui. As far as he was concerned, the young master was the young master. It made no difference whether the young master was the great master of Jingyang or the so-called sword devil. Zhuo Rizhui didn't give up. Looking at Zhao Liu's black hair fluttering in the wind, he asked, "If he is really the senior master of Jingyang, why did he make such an arrangement 4 years ago?" It was true. If Jing Jiao was Jingyang, why did he think of retreating? The disciples of the younger generation all knew that Jing Jiao always believed in one saying, "Retreat in order to advance." It was the last resort of the weak. Gu Qing said, "My master must have predicted that Fang Jingtian would leave the Hermit Peaks and that Aoyama couldn't have internal strife. That's why he made such an arrangement." Looking at a green stone in the river, Zhuo Rizhui said thoughtfully, "He sent Senior Master Guan Yuan to the West Ocean in advance to avoid any mishaps. Of course, my master also felt that being the sect master was a bit troublesome," said Gu Qing slowly. "So he left the mountains to seek peace and quiet." Zhuo Rizhui patted his shoulder sympathetically, saying, "After hearing what you said, I finally believe that he is the senior master of Jingyang. Is the Byron you just mentioned the ancestor of Zhongzhou school?" Lu Shui walked to Zhao Liu's side and asked her seriously. Zhuo Li, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu were also concerned about the reason why the immortal Jingyang failed to ascend, but they thought it might be a secret, and it was inconvenient for Zhao Liu to tell them, so they refrained from asking. Lu Shui wouldn't tolerate it. Zhao Lei briefly told them what happened after Jingyang ascended. The river bank was quiet again. The young disciples of Aoyama were silent for a long time, feeling more pressure. If that was the case, then the battle between the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou school would be inevitable. Zhao Lei stood up and left the river bank, saying, "Hurry up and cultivate." Looking at her back, Ruzhui shouted, "Then we should ask the senior master to repair it." Zhao Lei waved her hand and didn't pay any attention to him, walking upstream. There were always crabapple blossoms floating in the river, so there must be a crabapple tree upstream. She walked to the crabapple tree, looked at the woman in white, and said, "If you want to go in, I'll ask Gu Qing to open the formation." Bai Zhao looked down at the misty manor at the foot of the mountain and said, "I'm here to say a few words to him, but it's better if you pass the message on." Zhao Lei said, "That's fine. What I want to say is you might be a bit tired today, but I'm a bit happy because you might not be Jingyang." Bai Zhao was silent for a while, then softly said, "If you really are a sword demon and have been banished from Aoyama, then I'll be even happier." These two sentences didn't have a head or a tail, so it was hard to understand. But Zhao Lei understood what she meant. If Jingjiu really was the reincarnation of Zhenren Jingyang, then Bai Zhao would give up on him, because there was no way to get close to him. If Jingjiu was a sword demon banished from Aoyama, then this girl with a firm Dao heart would approach him without hesitation. Just like Lu Shui, she didn't care who he was. What she cared about was who he was to her. After saying these two sentences, Bai Zhao withdrew his gaze and looked at Zhao Lei, saying, "When we were on the top of Shinma Peak, you told me about traveling together. I didn't quite understand what you meant at that time, but now I do. I really envy you and admire you." She was the future headmaster of Zhongzhou School, the only daughter of Bai Zhenren, and the descendant of Bai Run. Even if she wanted to travel with Jingjiu for a while, she couldn't do it. Zhao Lei felt sorry for her. She thought for a while and reached out her right hand to touch her head. She wasn't touching Ada, and she wasn't Jingjiu, so her action was a bit clumsy. Bai Zhao was slightly stunned, then smiled and said, "I'll come back to see you in a few years." Zhao Lei said, "You take care of yourself." The whole house was under the protection of the formation. The formation set up by Gu Qing could shelter them from wind and rain, isolate them from sight and breath, and keep the mountain in spring all the year round. But it couldn't stop the begonia petals from flowing into the house along with the stream. They made a dozen turns in the house and then flowed out. At the seventh turn, there was a folded corridor with eaves extending to the water. Here, one could listen to the rain, listen to the water, admire the flowers, and take a nap. Jingjiu lay on the bamboo chair, holding a grain of sand in his hand, thinking about where to put it on the porcelain plate. He hadn't played this game for many years, which meant that he had a rare leisure time at this time. Of course, it was also because he was a bit tired. Holding the seal of the king of the underworld and killing Uncle Tai Lu with one punch, he was a bit tired. But the real mental fatigue was dealing with so many people, especially Taiping Zhenren, who wrote the letter. "Bai Zhao is here." Zhao Lei walked up to him and said. Jingjiu didn't raise his head, but grunted in acknowledgement. Back when she came to Aoyama to propose marriage, I thought she was very pitiful and wanted to touch her head, but I didn't think it was appropriate, so I just patted her shoulder. Zhao Lei said, "She was very happy today, but I thought she was even more pitiful, so I couldn't help but touch her head a few times." Jingjiu raised his head and glanced at her, asking, "How many times?" Zhao Lei thought about it and said, "3 times. "Don't learn from me," said Jingjiu. "You'll get into a lot of trouble." Zhao Lei knew he was in a bad mood. Even though he was just taking advantage of the situation, he was expelled from Aoyama after all. Who could be completely emotionless? "I'm indeed a bit tired. Since the West Ocean, Lucy's choice has disappointed me." Jingjiu knew what she was thinking about and said, "Yuan Qijing hasn't given me the great formation of Aoyama all these years. That's one of the reasons." The tiredness was the beginning of all this, or in other words, it made him start to think about how to deal with it. His big brother had succeeded in the immortalization, so he didn't want him to stay in Aoyama anymore. He took the initiative to leave to avoid the division of Aoyama and killed senior Uncle Tai Lu to eliminate the biggest internal threat. Plus, Fong Jingtian had succeeded in the heavenly arrival realm. Now Aoyama sect was obviously safer than before, and they had more confidence to face the pressure for Zhongzhou school. As for himself, leaving was not a big deal. How could Aoyama not take care of people? Zhao Lei didn't say anything more. She sat down on the end of the bamboo chair and accompanied him quietly. Because of Nan Wang, Jingzhou's seclusion had become a well-known secret before it officially started. This was the first day he left Aoyama, but the yard outside Cloudy Town had already welcomed many guests, which was ridiculous. After Nan Wang, it was Lu Shui, then by Zhao, then Sensei Kanyang, and Shui Yu Nunnery's Zheng Tao, who came to visit together. They all represented the attitude of their respective sections. Just like Zhuo Ruzhui represented the attitude of Qingguang Peak and Liangwang Peak to some extent. It was said that Jingzhou was a sword devil, but what if he was the immortal Jingyang? Therefore, the Platonist sect, the Mirror sect, and Shui Yu Nunnery all sent junior disciples here, and they were all girls who knew Jingzhou. People like the sect master would never show up. Sensei, Kanyang, and Zheng Tao were led to the corridor by Guqing. Looking at Jingzhou sitting on the bamboo chair, they felt a strong sense of strangeness and fear. They lowered their heads and dared not say a word. Even Sensei didn't have any of her usual arrogance. She was obedient like a fish that Hejan had his eyes on. The immortal Jingyang was the immortal Jingyang. There was no need for any prefix, description, or explanation. Just the name alone was enough. He wasn't someone who could get close to him by acting coquettishly or shamelessly. Tell your master that I got it. You can go back now. Jingzhou turned to Kanyang as if he wanted to say something. Guqing and the others knew that Kanyang was his disciple in the Mirror sect, so they wondered if he should keep her here. They didn't know that Jingzhou was thinking that Tong Yin was still in the Hermit Peaks. After the disturbance caused by Nan Wang, it was impossible to have a peaceful life here. Many sects had left their disciples in Cloudy Town to keep an eye on the fog. When they saw Sensei and the other two walk into the fog, and the Aoyama sect didn't stop them, they had a lot of ideas. Ozawa, Baodong Zen Temple, and a dozen other sects also sent their young disciples to visit after a short discussion. Jingzhou wouldn't meet everyone, so Guqing was the one who received them. He answered them skillfully, saying that he understood what they wanted and would convey their message to his master. Then he would send them away one by one, like an assistant or a butler. After a few days, Guqing thought that it was about time, but he didn't expect that more and more cultivators came to Cloudy Town. In the foggy town, there were sadhus wearing conical hats, proud rogue cultivators, elders of small sects, and even a few people with neither righteous nor evil auras. The number of them was even more than that of ordinary people. The townspeople had sensed that something was wrong, so they all closed their doors and dared not come out. The courtyard was enshrouded in a thick fog. Ordinary people couldn't get close to it, and neither could cultivators. They couldn't even see the scenery dozens of feet away. They could only kneel or sit cross-legged outside the fog, waiting nervously for the person in the fog to summon them. There were also a few cultivators who considered themselves to be talented. They raised their hands and shouted at the thick mist. I'm the genius of Gaoyang. If the immortal is willing to meet me, I might be able to see the true meaning of the sword art. If the immortal is willing to take me as his disciple, I will definitely carry forward the sword art of Aoyama. Immortal Jingyang, if you are really as powerful as the rumor says, why don't you just strike me to death with a thunderbolt? Chapter 585. It was getting colder and colder, and the fog was getting thicker and thicker. Occasionally, it would snow. More and more cultivators came to Cloudy Town. Some of them were kneeling outside the fog and kowtowing, trying to become Zhenren Jingyang's disciple. Some of them were standing at a distance, staring at the fog with a greedy look in their eyes. Some of them were cursing at the fog, shouting that they would avenge Zhenren Jingyang and kill the sword demon. However, None of them dared to actually rush into the fog. Scenes that were either absurd or ridiculous played out outside Cloudy Town and were updated every day. The Aoyama sect didn't seem to know what was happening in Cloudy Town. They didn't care at all. As time went by, the cultivators confirmed Aoyama sect's attitude. They were no longer nervous. They walked around Cloudy Town as they pleased. They even harassed the residents a few times. The situation didn't improve until a certain day. An arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect, who thought that he was talented and the future of the righteous path, often shouted things that were not pleasant to the ear, such as demons or being struck by lightning. The fog was still quiet and ignored him, so he became even more reckless. He even broke into a restaurant in Cloudy Town. In the restaurant, after drinking a few jars of wine, the arrogant cultivator was about to do something even more outrageous. At that moment, the clouds in the sky rolled, and the fog on the street suddenly dispersed. A blood-red lightning struck down from the sky. The blood-red lightning accurately and magically passed through the roof of the restaurant and landed on the body of the arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect in the private room. The arrogant cultivator from the Celestial sect didn't even have time to defend himself. He was blasted into pieces by the blood-red lightning. To be more precise, he wasn't blasted into pieces. He was only blasted into a dozen pieces of burnt flesh. The cuts on the flesh were very smooth. There was no blood at all. It was obvious that they were cut by a flying sword. In the cultivation world, this blood-red flying sword was very famous. It didn't regret its death, hence the name Thoughtless. That was perfected Jingyang's original sword, which now belonged to Aoyama sect's Shinma Peak sect master, Zhao Liu. Naturally, the madman from the Tianqing clan behaved himself, and so did the rest of the cultivators in Cloudy Town. The arrogant ones were rendered speechless, and they kowtowed even more sincerely, especially those cultivators who shouted that they wanted to kill the monster, and they even slipped away quietly. Cloudy Town regained its peace, and the residents went back to their normal lives. The shops selling steamed cakes and buns reopened, and the residents even dared to say a few words to those cultivation practitioners. The restaurant had also reopened. The aroma of the hot pot drifted far away along with the mist, attracting many cultivators who had nothing to do. The private room on the second floor facing the street had never been opened, no matter how high the price the cultivators offered. As for things like threats and intimidation, no one had forgotten that the mad disciple of the heaven-raising sect, who had been blasted into pieces by the blood-colored lightning, had died in this restaurant. Why has no one ever heard of that sword? Isn't the inherited heaven sword the chief sword of Aoyama? During the Battle of the West Ocean, many people knew that the inherited heaven sword was not a sword, but a sheath. It was said that the sheath was used to contain the all-in-one sword. Is that all-in-one sword really a heavenly treasure? Of course it is. If it is not a heavenly treasure, how could it have seized the spiritual soul of perfected Jingyang and reincarnated as a human? My fellow cultivator, please be careful. It was not the all-in-one sword that seized the spiritual soul of perfected Jingyang, but the perfected reincarnated with the help of the sword. Some of the cultivators in the restaurant had been here since the beginning, and some had arrived recently. Their discussions would always turn into arguments and even angry glares at each other, and the process kept repeating. By now, the cultivation world had basically confirmed that Jingjiu was the sword monster because there was too much evidence, and he had never dared to take out the inherited heaven sword to prove it. Yet, the majority of the cultivation practitioners in Cloudy Town believed that the person in the fog was the reincarnation of the perfected Jingyang, or, in other words, it was their wish. Taiping Jinren had asked Apiao to say, "It is not a self-evident truth who you are." However, it was a self-evident truth who had the highest cultivation state in the cultivation world. The perfected Jingyang was the first person in Chaotian in 1,000 years. Even though he might fail in his ascension, he was still the first person in 1,000 years. This was the public opinion in the cultivation world for hundreds of years. The fake manor cave of the perfected Jingyang had attracted so many cultivation practitioners to take the risk to investigate it. The patch of fog might be the true body of the perfected Jingyang. Who wouldn't want to come and have a look? Even if they had no chance to meet him, it would be a great fortune to be able to see the patch of fog, be seen by the person in the fog, and absorb the same spiritual energy of heaven and earth at such a close distance. Nothing could stop the cultivation practitioners from pursuing the Tao. The perfected Jingyang was the Tao. Please take a seat, cultivation friends. I'll go back to Scenery Garden now. A monk of the Dongyi Taoist sect put down the chopsticks in his hand and bowed to the cultivation practitioners around the restaurant before walking out of the restaurant. It had been a long time since the grand ceremony of Aoyama. The Aoyama sect didn't pay any attention to these cultivation practitioners in Cloudy Town, and nothing could be detected in the fog. Yet, the cultivation practitioners had no intention of leaving. This monk of the Dongyi Taoist sect would wait outside the patch of thick fog every day, except when he ate his meals, showing no sign of impatience. There were many other cultivation practitioners like him, and they all thought that the perfected Jingyang was testing their willpower. Looking at the back of the monk heading toward the outside of the town, a middle-aged man who looked like a scholar said in a mocking tone, "They come here every day to eat meat and drink wine. I heard that they don't forbid marriage. I wonder how the masters of the Guochang Temple can tolerate these deviant monks. They should expel them from the Zen sects as soon as possible." The rest of the cultivation practitioners merely smiled without replying. Some of them stood up and chased after the monk. The middle-aged scholar was taken aback for a moment, and then let out a self-mocking smile, saying, "Well, it's all right. I'll wait for another 100 days. Having said that, he put down a golden leaf and strode out of the restaurant. The rest of the cultivation practitioners smiled at each other and put down the golden leaves, saying that they would go together. The manager of the restaurant walked out from the back of the restaurant. He picked up the golden leaves on the tables one by one and put them into his bag casually. Then he picked up the soup pot and poured some white soup for the last table. After chatting with the customers for a while, he walked back to the back of the restaurant with a calm expression on his face. It seemed that he didn't realize that the money he had collected that day was equivalent to the annual income of a big restaurant in Jiaoga City. This manager is a regular person, but he is obviously not ordinary. It looks like this restaurant is not an ordinary place. The last table was occupied by a pair of master and his disciple. The older one was the elder of the mysterious heaven sect, Zhou Yunmu, and the younger one was the current sect master of the mysterious heaven sect, Lu Jin. I've heard a rumor that the senior master Zhao Liu likes eating hot pot very much. Lu Jin said, "I've inquired about the name earlier. It said that there's a large manor house in that patch of fog. The people thought that this should be the second garden of the immortal Jingyang, so they named it Scenery Garden." Looking at the street outside the restaurant, Zhou Yimu said, "Your master was fortunate enough to cultivate to the Yuanying state and see more sceneries. Your talent is similar to mine, and your temperament is much better than mine. I don't want you to stay in your current cultivation state, because the Yuanying state is not enough. Now that there is such an opportunity, I hope you won't miss it. I fought alongside Jing Jiao, the senior master in the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, but I was actually under his protection, and that was 32 years ago. Lu Jin was the most valued genius disciple of the mysterious heaven sect. He entered the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting with great difficulty and was placed in the same group as Jing Jiao. Since then, Jing Jiao had become the brightest star of the young generation in the cultivation world, and later he became the immortal sect master of the Aoyama sect. Lu Jin would recall the past once in a while, feeling sentimental. As for whether he should pay a visit to Jing Jiao, he didn't even dare think about it. In comparison to a huge sect like the Aoyama sect, the mysterious heaven sect was like an ant. The gap between the two sects was too large, and the mysterious heaven sect couldn't reach it. However, no one had expected such a change to occur. Jing Jiao might be the reincarnation of the immortal Jingyang. Regardless of whether he was the immortal Jingyang or the sword devil, he had been expelled from Aoyama. Even though the possibility of him being the sword devil was still low, he was much closer to the human world. As such, he should consider paying a visit to Jing Jiao. The so-called scenery garden couldn't be seen in the thick fog. It was only a figment of their imagination. The mountain stream flowed on the gentle slope. In the open space between the flowering trees, there were cultivators who were meditating with their eyes closed. There were also some cultivators who were practicing their Dao or sword techniques. It was as lively as a market. Seeing this, Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin were both startled, wondering what was going on. The Flowing Water Three-Flower sect is the external sect of the No Mercy sect. Their sword styles are not bad, and this young man has a good talent. But does he think he could be chosen by the immortal Jingyang? What are you thinking about? The middle-aged scholar who had appeared in the restaurant earlier said, with a mocking expression, while looking at the young cultivation practitioner riding the sword in front of the fog, is he just flying around like that to perform acrobatics? Hearing this person's harsh words, Lu Jin said with a smile, "Everyone who comes here has something to ask for. There's no need for you to act like this, cultivationist." The middle-aged scholar said with a sneer, "I don't want to ask for any secret method of the sword work, and I'm not greedy enough to be taken as a personal disciple by the immortal. It's just that someone in my family is sick, and the Guocheng temple can't cure him, so I have no choice but to come here." Someone in his family was sick. This statement sounded quite normal, but it was obviously not the case. Otherwise, why would he come here after asking the Guocheng temple for help? Lu Jin felt a bit sympathetic and thought that since the illness couldn't be cured by the Guocheng temple, it must be very troublesome. Why would he come here to ask the immortal Jingyang for help? Zhou Yunmu said, "The immortal Jingyang is half a master to the Zen master. And as the saying goes, if you understand one method, you will understand all methods. So, he might have a way to cure the illness." The middle-aged scholar's countenance softened a bit as he remarked, "You're quite knowledgeable." "I'm Lu Jin of the Mysterious Heaven sect," said Lu Jin. The middle-aged scholar's expression changed slightly as he said, "Are you the sect leader of the Mysterious Heaven sect? Are you the senior Zhou Yunmu?" Upon hearing this, the cultivation practitioners in the surroundings looked at them in tandem and then came over to greet them. The Mysterious Heaven sect was a small cultivation sect in the cultivation world, but it had two outstanding sect masters, Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. A few years ago, Zhou Yunmu had become a swordsman in the Yuanying state, a rarely seen swordsman among the small cultivation sects and the free-traveling cultivation practitioners. Why did they come to Cloudy Town? As the cultivation practitioners were pondering over this question, a surprise scream burst out from somewhere. "The gate is open. Scenery Garden is open." The thick fog hadn't dispersed yet, and Scenery Garden hadn't shown its true appearance, let alone opened the gate. They had waited for many days, and the day had finally come. Those cultivation practitioners didn't react immediately, standing on the same spots in a daze. A moment later, they came back to their senses. Their bodies trembled slightly, but they didn't dare take a step forward, standing on the same spots. Yuan Chu walked out from the courtyard and asked the crowd, "Where are the cultivation friends of the Mysterious Heaven sect?" Countless gazes fell on Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin were also startled, wondering what was going on, but they didn't dare delay. They strode to the front of the courtyard and bowed to Yuan Chu, indicating their identities. Yuan Chu reached out his right hand, motioning for them to follow him into the courtyard. The rest of the cultivation practitioners were in an uproar, thinking that even if Zhou Yunmu was a rare swordsman in the Yuanying state of a small cultivation sect, how could they be inferior to him? Some of them took a few steps forward reflexively, intending to talk to Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu didn't do anything but shot a glance at these people indifferently. Though he didn't seem to exist on the Shinma Peak, his gaze was as cold as the snow, showing a bit of the awe-inspiring aura of a granduncle. Those people were startled, not daring to take a single step forward. "Sect Master Lu!" A trembling shout suddenly broke out in the crowd. The middle-aged scholar took a few steps forward and knelt down on the ground with a thud, holding up a booklet that had been edited in good condition. The cold winter wind ruffled the booklet, exposing the old and new ink words. It was neither a magic method nor a list of treasures to be offered as offerings, but a medical record and a prescription. He didn't ask Lu Jin to bring him to Scenery Garden. All he wanted was to find a chance of survival for his family. Lu Jin was fully aware that it was a rare opportunity that day. If he annoyed the immortal masters of Aoyama in Scenery Garden, he would have a great regret. Yet, as his master Zhou Yunmu had said, he had an extraordinary temperament. Without thinking too much, he bowed to Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu nodded to indicate that it didn't matter. Lu Jin took the medical record from the middle-aged scholar's hand and turned around to enter Scenery Garden. Seeing the front gate of Scenery Garden closed again, the middle-aged scholar's face turned pale, his lips quivering slightly. It was unclear whether he was nervous or expectant. It didn't take long before the front gate was open again, and Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin walked out. The fog enshrouded the mountains and fields again, and Scenery Garden disappeared from the human world again. All the cultivation practitioners crowded around them, trying to establish a friendly relationship with this pair of master and disciple, asking them about the situation inside and what they had learned. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin didn't answer them, nor did they slow down their steps. They walked straight to the front of the middle-aged scholar. Lu Jin returned the medical record to him and said while shaking his head, "I'm sorry. The immortal doesn't have any solution." Hearing this, the middle-aged scholar's face grew paler, as if he had been struck by a thunder. His body swayed, and he almost fell down. "My condolences, my cultivationist," Lu Jin said to him sympathetically. The middle-aged scholar took the medical record with his trembling hand, and his knuckles turned white as he squeezed it. However, he didn't tear up the medical record in the end. It was unclear whether it was because he felt hopeless and helpless, or he didn't want to tear it up. A moment later, he calmed down and put away the medical record carefully, bowing to Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin to express his gratitude. After that, he bowed to Scenery Garden in the thick fog. Then, he turned around and walked toward the outside of the mountain. Chapter 586. The cultivation practitioners who came to Cloudy Town had their own purposes. That middle-aged scholar wanted to ask Jingjiu to cure his family member. Since he failed, he had to leave. His back view looked peaceful, but it was actually desolate. It seemed that he wouldn't come here again. It was unknown who was sick in his family, but he must have a deep affection for them, which was why he came here and left like this. Looking at the figure disappearing into the distance, the crowd felt sad and sympathetic. Yet, they were all cultivation practitioners, so this feeling soon disappeared. They continued to surround Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin, asking them what had happened in Scenery Garden. Zhou Yunmu didn't say anything. Lu Jin had no choice but to explain. The immortal didn't allow him to tell them, so he asked the cultivation friends to forgive him. The crowd had no choice but to get out of the way. Nobody noticed that after the figure of the master and the disciple disappeared in the clouds, a few cultivation practitioners left soundlessly after exchanging glances. The morning sunlight illuminated the muddy river, and the winter snow covered the rice fields. It was a beautiful scene. A few years ago, the sword light had wiped out all the demons in the muddy river in one night. The populace on both sides of the muddy river didn't need to worry about them anymore, and their lives were much better than before. As their lives became better, fewer people prayed to the gods and the Buddha, and the small mountain god temples in the countryside were gradually abandoned. There was an abandoned mountain god temple in this mountain. The old tiles were covered with snow, and the cold wind leaked out from the broken walls. It looked quite desolate. Lu Jin opened his eyes. After making sure that the magic pills had all been converted into Zhen Yuan and that his injury was not serious, he looked at the outside of the temple, feeling a bit worried. "There are no enemies within 10 miles, said Zhou Yunmu. "You should take a rest." Lu Jin said, "It's still far from the mountain gate. I don't know what will happen next." After they left Scenery Garden in Cloudy Town, they had encountered 3 groups of cultivation practitioners who tried to rob them. The first group of robbers were 3 free-traveling practitioners, followed by a few devil men of the deviant sects, and the last group of masked men were probably the orthodox swordsmen of the sect of 3. What these cultivation practitioners wanted to rob was not money, but something brought out by the master and the disciple from Scenery Garden. Everybody saw them enter Scenery Garden with their own eyes, so they all thought that they must have obtained something. Whether it was pills or cultivation methods, they were definitely good stuff. If Zhou Yunmu didn't have a high cultivation state, which was much higher than that of an elder of a small sect, and Lu Jin's methods were powerful enough, it would be hard for them to pass these trials. However, they did not let their guard down because they would gradually leave the Aoyama sect's territory after they passed the muddy river. Then, the truly powerful figures might strike. The snow on the roof of the mountain god temple suddenly trembled, then rustled down, piling up on the ground like a waterfall. Zhou Yunmu led Lu Jin out of the temple. Looking at the towering tree in the west, he said, "Cultivationist, please show yourself." Dozens of cold-resistant magpies flew out of the trees. At the same time, a gloomy voice came from the tree. "There's no need for that. I'm not interested in pills or cultivation methods. I just want to know what that person in Scenery Garden said to you." As the eerie voice spread in all directions, dozens of magpies fell to the ground and died. Hundreds of dead fish floated up in the muddy river at the foot of the cliff and were soon washed downstream. Seeing this, Lu Jin's expression changed slightly. He knew that this deviant practitioner was very powerful, and he wondered if his master could defeat him. Yet, Zhou Yunmu was fully aware that this person's cultivation state was higher than his, so he said expressionlessly, "A swordsman like you actually showed up in the vicinity of Aoyama. Don't you fear death? This place is very far from Aoyama." The deviant swordsman hiding in the tree continued. "And why would the Aoyama sect care about the affairs of Cloudy Town? You are chosen by Scenery Garden. Maybe the Aoyama sect wants you dead. Most importantly, I just want to know what that person said to you. Is it a sin?" Looking at the tree, Lu Jin asked sharply, "What if we don't tell you?" The voice of the deviant swordsman grew even gloomier. "Then it's a sin. I have no choice but to ask you to die." No sooner had he finished speaking than the corpses of the magpies on the cliff suddenly bounced up and exploded into dozens of bloody mists in the air. Dozens of black smokes came out from the bloody mists, carrying a pungent stench and murderous energy. Even the bright morning sunlight couldn't disperse them. The dozens of black smokes reached toward Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin as fast as lightning like ropes. Lu Jin took a few steps forward, his gloomy face full of solemnity. Dozens of flames came out from his white Taoist robe, blocking the black smokes. Standing behind Lu Jin, Zhou Yunmu waved his hands in front of his body. A golden glow came out from his chest and abdomen, in which a small man could be vaguely seen. Along with a sizzling sound, the flames were extinguished instantly. The most powerful magic method of the mysterious Heaven sect could only block the opponent for a moment. However, it was during this moment that Zhou Yunmu had finished setting up the magic method. He sprinkled the golden glows with his yuanying state, which started to compete with the black smokes. The scorched smell could be sensed everywhere on the cliff. The dilapidated mountain god temple had turned into ruins noiselessly during the competition between the two swordsmen. The black smokes, full of murderous energy and bloody intent, were devouring the golden glows at a visible speed, getting closer to Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin. It seemed that they would be swallowed by the black smokes in a few seconds. "You take the stuff and leave first," Zhou Yunmu said calmly, no fear visible in his eyes. Lu Jin knew that his master intended to sacrifice his yuanying to kill the opponent. Even if he couldn't do it, he had to buy some time for himself. Shocked, he was about to leave without hesitation. All of a sudden, a pale, blue sword light flew over from behind the ruins of the mountain god temple. It brushed past Lu Jin's body and pierced into the patch of black smokes. This pale blue sword light was evidently extraordinary. Its sword was formidable, but it was also extremely mild. As it combined with the magic method of Zhou Yunmu, it blocked the black smokes immediately. The incomer had a high cultivation state. Though he was not as powerful as the deviant devil man in the big tree, his cultivation state was almost the same as Zhou Yunmu's. The deviant devil man was certain that the incomer was a disciple of Aoyama in the free travel state. He couldn't help but feel shocked, wondering how Aoyama could arrive so quickly if it was located far away from here. Though the disciple of Aoyama in the free travel state was not his match, he didn't dare stay any longer. He put away the demonic treasure and was about to leave by breaking through the sky. It was then that the sky above the big tree was broken. More than a dozen cold and domineering sword lights descended from the sky. The swordsmen had different cultivation states. Some were in the free travel state, and some were in the undefeated state, but none of them was a match for the deviant swordsman. However, when these dozen sword lights combined, they displayed an unimaginably powerful force. The sword formation of Aoyama. The deviant swordsman let out a despairing and unreconciled cry. Countless sword sounds broke out. The towering tree disappeared. The broken leaves, the bare branches, and the bird nests among the branches had all been broken into pieces, forming a grave several feet high on the ground. The corpse of the deviant swordsman and the demonic infant had also been broken into pieces, scattering in the grave, unable to be put together again. A dozen disciples of Aoyama landed on the cliff. Zhou Yunmu expressed his gratitude to the group and introduced himself. The disciple of Aoyama who had struck first said with a mild expression and an extraordinary bearing, "I'm Guan Nanshan of Liangwang Peak." Guan Nanshan was the principal disciple of Aoyama and had a high reputation in the cultivation circle. Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin, of course, knew him, so they greeted him again. Looking at Zhou Yunmu, Guan Nanshan fell silent for a while, but he didn't ask anything in the end, saying the road ahead is long. Take care of yourselves, you two cultivation friends. Zhou Yunmu knew what Jing Jiu wanted to ask, and also understood why those disciples of Aoyama looked at him with a strange expression. "I won't see you off," he said with a faint smile. The muddy river kept flowing eastward as usual, as if it hadn't seen the previous scene. Of course, it was possible that it had seen it many times. Looking at the two figures disappearing in the distance, Guan Nanshan remarked, "It's not easy for such a small sect to have two swordsmen in the Yuaning state." Gu Han said, "Maybe they've been in contact with the other side for a long time." Guan Nanshan turned to the south, remaining silent. Cloudy Town was right there. With the departure of Jingjiu, the decree of the sect master was ignored. As a result, the disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't have to wait until they entered the broken sea state to get out of the mountains. In the last few days, the disciples of Liangwang Peak had been patrolling in the south like before. Intentionally or unintentionally, Guan Nanshan had paid more attention to the area between Nanhezu and the Muddy River. It was the same as before. Cloudy Town was right there. Guhan, of course, understood what his big brother meant. Looking at the invisible town in the distance, he said angrily, "You made it known to the whole world. Is it a hermit?" Enshrouded by the clouds and fog, the mountain stream and flowering trees looked like a fairyland, but the manor house was nowhere to be seen. The flowering trees were disturbed by the wind, and the water in the stream rippled. Zhuo Rujui returned to the courtyard by stepping on the swallowing boat sword. He said to Zhao Leu, "It's all right there. Next, they will head north from the Muddy River. As long as they don't cross Yu County, there should be no problem. I've informed Su Zai." Zhao Leu didn't know what Jing Jiu had told the master and disciple, but she said, "Good." Gu Qing said, "The curtain rollers have found out the result of their investigation. That middle-aged scholar is called Cheng Ruqing, who used to study in Yamatai for a few years. Later, he and his wife entered the Dongi Taoist sect for some unknown reason and tried to practice karma mudra with each other. But something went wrong. His wife became seriously ill and couldn't be cured. This person has nothing to do with Taiping." "Did the couple have a good relationship?" asked Zhao Leu. Gu Qing uttered him. After a moment of silence, he said, "His wife is a regular person." All the people in the courtyard fell silent. When a cultivation practitioner married a mortal, there would be a problem that couldn't be solved. No matter how good the relationship between the two of them was, they couldn't grow old together. That middle-aged scholar left Yamatai and took his wife to practice the secret method of the Dongi Taoist sect because he was reluctant to part with her. Does Senior Grandmaster know about this? Asked Zhuo Ruzhui. Zhao Liu said, he should have figured it out when he saw the medical case. Zhuo Ruzhui said, it will be the new year in a few days. What should we do? Should we ask him if he wants to eat the manatee meat of Penglai Island? Zhao Liu said, he has been in a bad mood lately. Don't bother him. Zhuo Ruzhui was puzzled, thinking that Jingjiu had been lying on the bamboo chair in a daze every day, as expressionless as before. How could she tell that he was in a bad mood? Chapter 587. Jingjiu's mood was as real as his own, and it was hard to tell what he was feeling. He was used to being expressionless, and he didn't have any hobbies. He would play with the sand in the ceramic plate once in a while, and it didn't mean anything when he didn't play with it. However, Zhao Liu was aware that he was in a bad mood. She had developed this ability after living with him for many years, and it was also a talent. On New Year's Eve, they left Scenery Garden after having a hot pot dinner. Zhuo Ruzhui, Gu Qing, and Yuan Shu continued their cultivation as if it were a normal day. Zhao Liu knelt before Jingjiu and hugged him, as she had done in the past. Jingjiu patted her back gently. Zhao Liu said, I started reading the Taoist canon when I was 6 years old, and I knew that there would always be farewells in life. I thought I had gotten used to it, but I was still touched by it. She was referring to the matter between the middle-aged scholar and his mortal wife. Jingjiu said, it's a good thing to get used to it, but it's hard to get used to the bad things. It's just that you are numb to it, and then you don't want to think about it anymore. Zhao Liu looked at Jingjiu with her black and white eyes wide open, asking seriously, is that the only thing you can do? Jingjiu said, I had a very good friend when I was young. I saw him grow old, get sick, and enter the grave with my own eyes, but I couldn't do anything about it. Zhao Liu pressed, and then, the story itself is meaningless because he is already dead. Jingjiu said, what I want to say is that this matter has made me think every day about how to stay together. One wouldn't think about it if they were numb to it. As long as they thought about it, they wouldn't be numb, even though it would be very painful. Zhao Liu said, so you saw that pair of master and disciple, and read those medical records. Jingjiu said, I hope everyone in the world can live a few more years. Life and death were the true farewells. Lucy I had left. That person in Zhaoga City would leave soon. Yuan Qijing would leave in a few years. Those idiots outside Scenery Garden and those idiots in Scenery Garden would leave one day. Jingjiu didn't like crowds, but he hated parting even more. Zhao Liu looked into his eyes and said very seriously, I don't want to leave you either. Promise me. Jingjiu looked at her and said, cultivate well. Live for at least another few thousand years, and then strive to live for tens of thousands of years. As long as you can live, live forever. If this was a conversation between lovers, the second half of the sentence should be, please don't leave me, but he would not say that. No matter how strong their relationship was, when the boss left one after the other, even if they left together, they would still be separated. Only when they were alive would they not be truly separated. Even if they were at opposite ends of the universe, separated by a distance that could never be crossed, as long as they knew that the other was still alive, they would be together. That middle-aged scholar and his wife probably wanted to do the same. The stars in the sky shone on the courtyard, the eaves, the running water, and Zhao Liu's eyes, making them sparkle. She looked at Jingjiu and said earnestly, I will. Ada landed under the eaves under the starlight. Seeing the strange atmosphere between the couple, he walked to Jingjiu and crouched on his knees after a moment of hesitation. Jingjiu rubbed his back and said, you can live for many more years. Don't be afraid. Ada sighed, thinking that even if he could live for another few thousand years, it would be nothing but a fleeting wave in comparison to eternity. It would be meaningless. Note, Zhao Li knew that Jingjiu was in a bad mood, and she also knew why he was in a bad mood. But the other 3 people in Scenery Garden didn't know. Rujui stopped thinking about it after a short while, but Gu Qing and Yuan Shu discussed with each other for a long time and came up with some ideas. So they sent the news to the outside of Scenery Garden. In their eyes, Jing Jiu left Aoyama for peace and quiet. But now Cloudy Town was full of people, and cultivation practitioners were everywhere in the mountains and fields outside the fog. Some cultivation practitioners kept kowtowing, dyeing the stream red. Some cultivation practitioners kept playing with their swords, scaring away the birds in the forest. How could Jing Jiu be happy? Soon, the cultivation world learned that the master and his disciple, the only ones who had ever entered Scenery Garden, had returned to the mysterious Heaven sect. It was said that the remaining deviant sect had set their eyes on this small sect, but they were wiped out before they could do anything. And it was not the Aoyama sect that did it, but another mysterious deviant sect. After that, the mysterious Heaven sect began to seal their mountains. It was obvious that they needed time to digest the benefits they had gained in Scenery Garden, which stimulated the cultivation world again. As the spring deepened, more and more cultivation practitioners came to Cloudy Town. Gu Qing and Yuan Shu became more and more worried about Jing Jiu's mood. So they sent the news to the outside of Scenery Garden for the second time. It was the most beautiful day of spring. Thousands of flowers were in full bloom, and the fog flowed away like clouds. The scenery outside Cloudy Town was breathtaking. Suddenly, snow fell from the sky. The snow was not heavy, and it did not feel particularly cold. It was not even the coldness of late spring. The ordinary residents of the town did not feel bitter, but found it interesting. However, those cultivation practitioners found something wrong. The snowflakes that ordinary people were not afraid of were as scary as ice blades when they fell on them. Even though they used Taoist magic to protect themselves, their clothes were still cut by the snowflakes, and the coldness went straight into their meridians. Some cultivation practitioners wanted to take the opportunity to show their perseverance and create a scene similar to the snow outside Scenery Gate, but they were almost frozen to death by the overnight snow. It was not until then that someone figured out what was going on. It was not the salt-like spring snow, but the wrath of the sword justice of Aoyama. How many people in the cultivation world could withstand the wrath of Yuan Shijing? The cultivation practitioners immediately scattered like birds and beasts. Most of them returned to their hometowns, not daring to step into Cloudy Town again. There were a dozen cultivation practitioners who were very brave, but they only dared to stay in Cloudy Town, not daring to take a look at the fog again. Scenery Garden finally quieted down. The disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't have to patrol around all day long to hunt down the evil demons of the deviant sects, so they had some leisure time. Like Gu Han and the other disciples of Liangwang Peak, some elders of Aoyama also had some resentment about this matter, and some were even more resentful. So did the sects such as the Kunlun sect. The cultivation practitioners of small sects and individual practitioners went to Cloudy Town to worship the so-called Scenery Garden, which made them very angry. It was a sword devil who lived there, not the immortal Jingyang. In the end, their resentment and anger had turned into dissatisfaction toward the Guocheng Temple. If Zen Master hadn't stepped forward during the grand ceremony of Aoyama, Jingjiu would have died on the spot. Even if Yuan Qijing forgave Jingjiu and allowed him to leave Aoyama, he could only hide in Chaotian like a stray dog and evade the pursuit. It was impossible for him to act so arrogantly and cause so much trouble. In the late spring, the Guocheng Temple welcomed a distinguished guest. The scripture preaching master brewed the tea himself and left after bringing the tea into the room, leaving the meditation room to Zen Master and the distinguished guest. The old man in gray clothing had an ordinary appearance and a dull temperament. The only special feature was that his forehead was very broad, as if it could contain the ocean or even heaven and earth. "Is the immortal here to denounce me?" Zen Master said this to the old man in gray clothing with a smile, his 2 bare feet under his buttocks moving slightly. Both his smile and his restless thumbs indicated that he was a bit nervous at the moment. How many people in Chaotian could make the young Zen Master feel nervous? Or, in other words, so cautious. Zen Master, don't mention it. I just came back from Penglai and passed by the East Ocean, so I came here to chat with you. How is the chief monk doing lately? The old man in gray clothing spoke slowly, and his tone was not obvious. Yet, he gave off a trustworthy feeling. Zen Master stopped smiling and said sadly, "It's difficult for the chief monk to come out from behind closed doors. All I hope is that he can have a peaceful escape in the end." After a moment of silence, the old man in gray clothing said, "The old chief monk has a profound understanding of the Buddhist methods. I'm sure he will leave in a good mood." Zen Master raised his teacup and said, "Thank you for your kind words." The old man in gray clothing continued, "I've been behind closed doors since the turmoil in the fiend prison. It's indeed inappropriate for the unicorn to come out of the mountains and make a scene in the Guochang temple. However, he is the divine guardian animal, and no sect rules can control him. Besides, his spiritual body has suffered a serious injury, so it's better to let it go." Zen Master put down the teacup, a faint smile on the corners of his mouth as he said, "The immortal Tan's way of letting it go is rather gentle." It turned out that this old man in gray clothing was the immortal Tan, the sect master of the Zhongzhou school. It was said that Bai Zhenren was the actual manager of the Zhongzhou school, but she was not the sect master. After Lu Si's departure, the immortal Tan was the #1 swordsman in Chaotian in name only. It was the same in all aspects, including his cultivation state and status. Of course, the person in Scenery Garden was not included. Zen Master continued, "A third of the back temple was destroyed. It was repaired after half of the gold in the palace treasury was transferred from Zhaoga City. The gold was quite heavy." The immortal Tan said, "It should be the fault of Taiping Zhenren of the Aoyama sect." Zen Master waved his hand to indicate that it was no longer necessary to mention this matter, asking, "Immortal, why do you want to see me?" The immortal Tan said honestly, "I want to hear the truth from you, whether he is the senior Jingyang or that devil's sword." In their cultivation state, many details and so-called evidence were meaningless. Zen Master stared at his eyes in silence, saying, "As long as he has inherited all the karma of the immortal Jingyang, he is the immortal Jingyang." Jing Jiao had said on the top of Tianguang Peak that he was the direction of all his karma. What Zen Master said was not the same as what Tong Yin had said, but they were somehow related. They were the same as the snow on the high mountain and the water in Ozawa. If Zen Master knew the conversation between Yuan Qijing and the dead dog in the sword jail, he would find that the two of them had the same opinion. After some thought, the immortal Tan said, "I'm how I want the world to view me. The person in the mirror is the outsider." Zen Master couldn't help praising him. The immortal Tan continued, "But Taiping Zhenren won't let him return to Aoyama, and Yuan Qijing won't live forever. The day Yuan Qijing died was the day Jing Jiao would die." Zen Master said, "It's not easy to kill him." The immortal Tan said, "When the heavenly sword becomes a devil, he will have a lot of advantages in the early stage of cultivation. But it's extremely difficult for him to reach the heavenly arrival state, because the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is not enough. In the current cultivation circle, the person who understood Jing Jiao's cultivation the best was not Zhao Liu, because her cultivation state was not high enough. It was Ada. Ada had seen Jing Jiao guiding the heavenly thunders for cultivation a few times, and he had expressed his concern at the time. The immortal Tan hadn't even seen Jing Jiao before, but he had pointed out Jing Jiao's biggest concern. Zen Master fell silent, because he knew that what the immortal Tan said was probably correct. Scenery Garden outside Cloudy Town seemed to be on the verge of becoming a holy land for the cultivation circle. But what if Yuan Qijing died? Would Fang Jingtian let him go? By then, Jing Jiao and those around him would have no choice but to die. Or they would have to leave Aoyama for real. Zen Master asked, "What's the point of telling me all this, immortal?" The immortal Tan said, "I'd like to ask Zen Master to write a letter for me." The expression on Zen Master's face changed slightly as he asked, "A letter?" The immortal Tan said, "I'd like to go to Cloudy Town in person, but I'm worried that I won't be able to win that person's trust. As such, I have no choice but to get a letter from you first. Note: when I wrote about Ada lamenting the waves, I thought of a sentence that Yi Luyun once said in the Qingyu year. My earliest idea should have come from Matsuo Basho's words, but I have long forgotten it. That sentence was, "The waves only bloom for a while, but it is no different from 1,000-year stone." It is the same for Luyun. They are both talking about the waves, but the meaning expressed in the two books, separated by 12 years, is the opposite. Now it does not seem too artistic and ignores life and death, but it is actually a problem of logic. The life of the waves and the 1,000-year stone are both limited. In the long river of time, they are actually both waves. As for the question of Jing Jiu's true identity, this large part of the plot temporarily stopped here. This was one of the 3 points that I wanted to write about when I wrote about the Chaotian Dao. I was very happy to write about it, and I was also looking forward to the world after my ascension. As for Jing Jiu's true identity, whether it's Jing Yang or all in one, I naturally have my own answer. However, based on the current plot, there's actually no way to prove it. We can only rely on your own judgment. However, I've always been honest when I write books. I'll write a definite answer for everyone as soon as possible. Chapter 588. Zen Master looked at him in silence and said, "If the immortal went to Cloudy Town, the Aoyama sect would be very nervous, and the human world would not be a pleasant place." The immortal Tan said, nonchalantly, "I want to go there for the sake of the pleasant human world." After a moment of silence, Zen Master said, "I can probably guess what you're going to do. I'm surprised and impressed, so I'll write the letter to you." "Thank you," said the immortal Tan. It didn't take long before he received the letter and left the Guocheng Temple. The escape method of heaven and earth at the Zhongzhou school was unparalleled in the world. Given his extraordinary cultivation state, he had no need to ride the cloud boat, so he could travel there by treading on the air. The fields in spring looked green and pleasant, but they didn't provide a sense of security due to the abundance of food. The carriages were still parked on both sides of the official road outside the Guocheng Temple, and the sheds could be seen everywhere. Many porridge stalls could be seen in the distance. This was the tradition of Machio. The governor of Machio and the wealthy households in the county would ensure the food supply during this period. Standing in the sky, the immortal Tan looked down at the scene below and the smoke coming out from the porridge stalls, thinking that the human world should be so beautiful. No matter how good the escape method was, the big figures in heaven and earth couldn't be invisible, at least not when they were close to the great formation of Aoyama. 2 powerful and exceedingly formidable sword lights flew over from the deep part of Aoyama one after another. Fang Jingtian and Jinren, who had just returned from the West Ocean, guarded the 2 sides of the sky at a distance of 200 miles. A wind and snow approached at an unimaginable speed. The 3-foot sword came out from the wind and snow. Standing on the sword, Yuan Qijing looked toward the east. The 3 strongest swordsmen of Aoyama all came out to greet him, but they didn't do it to welcome him or to show their respect. The clouds in the sky dispersed, revealing the figure of the immortal Tan. Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly, "The immortal Tan came here uninvited. Do you intend to wage a war against Aoyama?" "This place is not Aoyama." "Oh, it's a bit close," said the immortal Tan. "Being close is the problem," said Yuan Qijing. The immortal Tan said, "Zhaoga City is very close to the Cloud Dream Mountain, but you people have never asked for my permission to go to Zhaoga City." After a moment of silence, Yuan Qijing asked, "What brings you here, immortal?" "To see someone," said the immortal Tan. The immortal Tan landed in Cloudy Town and went to that restaurant to eat the famous hot pot. He didn't taste anything outside the pot, nor did he feel anything, so he got up and walked out of the town. There was a path outside the town that led to the cliff that was shrouded in clouds all year round. Many cultivators had already left. Those with the strongest willpower did not dare to get close to the cloud because of Aoyama's sect's warning. They only dared to look at it from afar in the town. seeing the immortal Tan heading toward the clouds and fog. The cultivation practitioners wondered if this old man in gray clothing was an idiot. The thickness of the fog was uneven, just like the color of the flowers and the koi in the stream. The immortal Tan didn't stop for even a moment under such a beautiful scenery. He kept on walking toward the inside of the fog. The fog dispersed gradually, and the flowers and trees swayed slightly in the wind. Some of the koi fled in fear, but more of them moved along with his footsteps like his followers. He saw a courtyard as he went upstream of the stream. Seeing the scene, the cultivation practitioners in the town were stunned speechless. What shocked them even more was that the front gate of the courtyard was opened. After the pair of master and disciple of the mysterious heaven sect, Scenery Garden had another guest, and Zhao Leiu and the others came out to welcome him in person. Who was this old man in gray clothing? The scenery in the courtyard was even more beautiful, but it was far less pleasing to the eyes of the immortal Tan than the few young people by his side. In his eyes, Zhao Leiu and Zhuo Ruzhui were the most beautiful things in the world. They were the future of Aoyima's sect, but they were also the future of Chaotian. If they could become the future of Zhongzhou School, wouldn't it be the most wonderful thing in the world? Zhao Leiu and the others didn't know what was on the immortal Tan's mind, but they felt the expression in this important figure's eyes was a bit strange, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. What did the immortal sect master of Zhongzhou School intend to do by coming to Cloudy Town in person, given his high status? Even Jing Jiao showed enough respect to the immortal Tan, to say nothing of these young disciples of Aoyama. He stood up from the bamboo chair ahead of time. The immortal Tan handed the letter from Zen Master to him and said straightforwardly, "I'm here to propose a marriage." It was evident that he intended to act more amiable, like an old father who wished for his daughter's happiness. But he couldn't smile due to his dull temperament, so the expression on his face was a bit odd. The expressions on Zhuo Ruzhui, Gu Qing, and Yuan Chu's faces grew even more odd, as if they had just swallowed 3,000 swords. Then they glanced at Zhao Leiu reflexively. Zhao Leiu's reaction was beyond everyone's expectation, as she asked straightforwardly, "What is the condition?" The immortal Tan glanced at her appreciatively and said to Jing Jiao, "If you come over, I'll marry little Zhao to you and give you the position of the sect master." After some thought, Zhao Leiu said to Jing Jiao, "I think it's a good idea." The immortal Tan wanted Jing Jiao to go to Cloud Dream Mountain to be the sect master of Zhongzhou School. It was not a marriage proposal at all, but an attempt to snatch the disciple from Aoyama. And such a condition had never happened in the history of the cultivation circle. The Zhongzhou School had demonstrated its sincerity and determination. If it were any other cultivation practitioners, they would agree even if they didn't feign out of happiness, or at least think about it carefully. Yet, Jing Jiao refused without a second thought, saying, "I'm the sect master of Aoyama." "Thank you." This was indeed a good reason. The sect master of Aoyama was not inferior to the sect master of Center Sect. Why would he go to Aoyama? The problem was, besides himself, who else would think that he was still the sect master of Aoyama? Taiping Jiren will find a way to kill you, and those people in Aoyama won't want you to live either. The immortal Tan went on, "And you have a problem in your cultivation, which is hard to solve. What will you do after Yuan Qijing leaves?" Upon hearing this, Zhao Leiu and the others looked at Jing Jiao, feeling worried. The immortal Tan was the most outstanding figure in the cultivation circle in Chaotian. If he said that Jing Jiao had a problem in his cultivation, it must be true. "If you agree to my proposal, we can provide you with a fairy book, which should be enough for you." The immortal Tan continued, "Of course, it won't be the fairy book you obtained at the Dao competition." "I'm fine right now," said Jing Jiao without any hesitation. The immortal Tan said, "I'm not talking about the current situation. If you change your mind later, you can tell me at any time." Having said that, he left the courtyard and leaped to the high sky by stepping on the flowering tree lightly. Standing in the cloud, he nodded in the direction of Aoyama and turned to head north. Soon, he had become a dark speck in heaven and earth. The wind and snow in the high sky had gradually disappeared. Yuan Qijing returned to Shangda Peak on the 3-foot sword. Fang Jingtian and Guang Yuanzhen met at a spot. They felt relieved when they saw the dark speck disappear. You come and go as you please. Do you really regard our Aoyama as nothing? I'll go over there to have a look, said Fang Jingtian. Guang Yuanzhen reminded him. Cloudy Town is a forbidden place for the Peak Masters. Fang Jingtian said. The sect master of Zhongzhou School has come to Aoyama to meet that devil. Shouldn't we be wary of him? The immortal Guang Yuan stared into his eyes and said, Big Brother said that nobody is allowed to touch that place. Fang Jingtian said with a nonchalant expression in his eyes, his silvery eyebrows ruffling slightly. The white ghost is over there. Can I touch him? Guang Yuanzhen sighed, thinking that even if Big Brother couldn't touch Jingjiu, he could at least touch someone else. The immortal Tan came. Then he left. He had spoken only a few words. The words included a marriage proposal, Taiping Zhenren, and the sect master of Zhongzhou School. The shocking thunder was always hidden in such a mundane routine. Gu Qing and Yuan Chu didn't respond for a long time. The immortal Tan is indeed the sect master of Zhongzhou School, but the whole of Chaotian knows that the Bai family has the final say on Cloud Dream Mountain. Zhuo said, I think the immortal Tan doesn't want the Zhongzhou School to be owned by the Bai family forever. That's why he came here to use Grandmaster to break the deadlock. Zhao Liu said after a moment of hesitation, I think this is Bai Zhao's idea. She was fully aware that that feeble woman had a deep affection for Jing Jiu, even though she appeared nonchalant. Regardless of the hidden scheme in the invitation of the immortal Tan, Bai Zhao must have calculated it for Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu didn't want to get involved in this matter, so he didn't calculate it. Seeing that they were so attentive, he said, Go ask Tong Yin. Tong Yin was the one who knew the internal situation of Zhongzhou School the best. Bring that child from the underworld out. See if he wants to come out after asking Tong Yin, Jing Jiu said to Yuan Chu. Yuan Chu uttered yes in assent. Then he thought of another matter, asking, Young brother is still on the sword peak. Should we inform him? Let's wait for him to wake up by himself, said Jing Jiu. Gu Qing said, I have something to take care of here as well. I need to go out and take care of it. Jing Jiu knew what he meant, saying, I'll come back as soon as I'm done. The formation of Scenery Garden was arranged by Jing Jiu and implemented by Gu Qing himself. The immortal Tan could ignore it, but it would be troublesome for them to go out by themselves. As they came to a green rock by the stream, Gu Qing was about to dismantle the formation. Can you take care of it by yourself? Zhao Liu suddenly asked. Gu Qing had no intention of concealing it in front of her. It might be troublesome, he said worriedly. Zhao Liu turned to Zhuo and said, You go and help him. Zhuo was aware that it was a troublesome matter, so he said unwillingly, Why? I'm a disciple of Tianguang Peak, not a member of Shima Peak. You're a member of Scenery Garden now, said Zhao Liu. The immortal Tan said that he didn't want to talk about the current matter, which meant that he was fully aware that Scenery Garden couldn't exist as peacefully as it was now. This was the prophecy. The future always came faster than anyone could imagine. A storm came without any warning. The Aoyama sect had gradually calmed down after the initial panic. Yuan Qijing was in charge of the sect rules and regulations, as usual in Shangda Peak. The rules set by Jing Jiu had been largely modified by Fang Jingtian. The disciples of Liangwang Peak could enter and leave Aoyama at will. Jian Riyun and those young disciples who had opposed Jing Jiu's appointment as the sect master of Aoyama were released from the sword jail. However, Bai Rujing's arms were broken and his meridians were sealed by the will of the thoughtless sword, unable to be healed. As a result, he became a useless person. Those clans with connections to Shenma Peak, like the Gu clan and the Precious Tree House, were the most affected. After leaving Cloudy Town, Gu Qing and Zhuo rode their swords to Nanzhou and landed on the top floor of the yellow building in Chaonan City. Kneeling before the two of them, the boss of the Precious Tree House told them what had happened in the last 10 days as quickly as he could. According to the agreement between Jing Jiu and Ada, The Precious Tree House would be shared equally between Shinma Peak and Bihu Peak. Of course, Bihu Peak would only get the dividends and profits, but had no say in the matter. After the group of Shinma Peak left Aoyama, Bihu Peak didn't make any trouble. Instead, the other peaks made a clear request that all the products of the Precious Tree House and the precious medicines and treasures collected from the outside world were not allowed to be handed over to Shinma Peak. They had to be distributed among the 9 peaks. The shares of each peak will be determined tomorrow, which is also the deadline set by the mountain for me. In less than 10 days, the boss of the Precious Tree House had become so thin that he was almost out of shape. "I have no choice but to die," he said in a hoarse voice. Chapter 589. There were many roads leading to Aoyama. However, for the families and businesses attached to Aoyama, they would die if they didn't agree to Aoyama's sex request. It was impossible for him to agree to the request of the Green Mountain sect. If he did so, the people in Scenery Garden would also sentence him to death. Guqing might be able to understand his difficulties if he were alone, but he had served Zhao Liu before, so he knew very well how formidable that young Peak Master was. Now, it was up to Shinma Peak to help him get through this. Guqing knew that the share to be determined tomorrow was actually the distribution of resources to those external families of Aoyama's sect. He had to support the Precious Tree House, because one of those external families had the surname Gu. Many families earned unimaginable wealth by transporting various resources to Aoyama. In the past hundreds of years, the Fong family had the highest status and made the most money. The Yuan family of Lelong Commandery was in charge of sea treasures and had a good relationship with Peng Lai. However, they never got involved in the business of Tianan land. As for the Liu family, no one had ever heard of it. The Gu family was the most prosperous family in recent years, so they were under the most pressure. The external families of Aoyama were not outsiders, and the guests were not just random people. All the heads of the families were present, and the lowest position was at least a third-generation minister of offerings. Therefore, they all knew each other. However, the atmosphere was so tense that no greetings could be heard in the quiet hall. Only occasional whispers could be heard. "Is that Ma Shixiang from Chengxiang? Hasn't the Ma family been abolished for a long time?" As long as they're alive, they won't be abolished. Immortal Master Ma Hua is the brain of Liangwang Peak after all, and his position is not low. Don't you see that the Jian family has come out of the mountain again? Immortal Master Jian has been released from the sword jail. It's said that he is valued by the Yunxing Peak Master. 3,000 years of turbid water changes the way. It's really hard to predict what will happen in the world. The Gu family has been prosperous for so many years, but it's still uncomfortable to think that it will be replaced by the Ma family and the Jian family. Be it the past or present, the Ma family and the Jian family were the most inconspicuous existences among the outer families in Aoyama. Now that they were about to receive a huge amount of benefits, it was only natural that many families were dissatisfied. But thinking about the situation in Aoyama for the past half a year, even if there were immortal masters in Aoyama, none of them were willing to stand out and say anything. As the curtain moved slightly, Yu Siluo of Liangwang Peak walked in with several fellow disciples. The patriarchs and consecrators of the various clans hurriedly stood up and bowed respectfully. Yu Siluo smiled and gestured for the clan leaders to skip the formalities and return to their seats. Then he walked up to the stage. On the auction platform on the first floor of the Precious Tree House, there was a folding screen. Behind a folding screen was a table and a chair. It was the main seat specially prepared for the immortal master of Aoyama. Ma Hua didn't go over. He stood in the corridor and looked at a private room to the side. He squinted his eyes and smiled. The Gu clan leader bowed and maintained his posture. Not to mention returning to his seat, he didn't even dare to straighten his body. He looked extremely pitiful. Jian Ryun looked at the Gu clan leader expressionlessly. He didn't say anything or ask the Gu clan leader to stand up. It seemed that he would let the Gu clan leader keep bowing like this. The Gu clan leader's face grew paler and paler as he thought of the Gu clan leader's precarious situation. He was on the verge of collapsing. The expression in Jian Ruyun's eyes grew colder as he looked at the Gu clan leader. The Jian clan and the Ma clan had been suppressed by the Gu clan over the past few years. Though they weren't completely ruined, they were in an extremely miserable state. Ma Hua said with a smile, "Those who deserve to die, you can arrange for their own deaths when you go back. Do you want to dirty our hands?" Upon hearing this, Yu Siluo stopped and turned around to take a look, but he didn't say anything. The Gu clan leader lowered his head even more, saying, "Things haven't been going well in our clan these days. 7 people have already left. I heard that the Immortal Master and young Master Han have a good relationship. Please have mercy on us." Ma Hua reached out his hand and patted his shoulder, saying, "These are the wishes of the masters. Big Brother Gu, and I can't say anything about it. I'm advising you to die for your own good. It's better to die than to make the masters angry." The Gu clan leader's head was almost lowered to the ground, but he didn't say anything this time. It was because he couldn't respond to this kind of thing, nor could he resist it. The Gu clan was an outstanding clan in the mortal world. They had many servants, including free-traveling practitioners and retired caretakers from Aoyama, but they still didn't have the right to negotiate with Ma Hua. Ma Hua was merely a regular disciple of Liangwang Peak, but he represented the will of some important figures in Aoyama. "I wonder which master has such a bad temper." A calm and mild voice burst out from a corner of the lobby. Hearing this voice, the Gu clan leader straightened his body slowly, and his expression relaxed a bit. Ma Hua looked at the dark corner with a faint smile on his face, saying nothing. Gu Qing walked out from the shadow and asked while looking at the Gu clan leader, "Elder Bai Rujing, both of his arms have been chopped off, and he has no chance of cultivation in this life. It's normal for him to be angry." Ma Hua had expected that Gu Qing would show up, so he wasn't surprised. He said with a smile, "What you just said is disrespectful to your master, right?" Gu Qing said calmly, "Disrespectful to one's master is a capital offense. But I'm the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, who in Aoyama is qualified to be my master." Ma Hua looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "He is a sword devil. Even if you want to lie to yourself, others won't accept it. Are you going to have another debate? It's so annoying. Can't you hurry up with such a trivial matter?" A lazy voice burst out. Everyone could tell whose voice it was, but for some reason, it sounded a bit slurred today. People looked at the source of the voice and found it came from the platform. The screen had been removed, exposing the table and chairs behind it. Many dishes were placed on the table. Zhuoruzhui was sitting in the chair, eating with chopsticks in his right hand. He didn't forget to talk while chewing. The situation was clear now. The branch of Shinma Peak, which had left Aoyama, and Liangwang Peak, which represented the current Aoyama, were going to confront each other. Yu Siluo knew his young brother's temperament well. He shook his head without saying anything, nor did he step onto the platform. Jian Ruyun looked at Zhuoruzhui expressionlessly and said, "Young brother Zhuo, are you sure you want to collude with that sword devil? I told you not to debate. It's not that troublesome. Let's have a fight." Zhuoruzhui grabbed a wet towel with his left hand and wiped his mouth. Finding the temperature was just right, he cast an appreciative look at the boss of the Precious Tree House and asked Jian Ruyun, "What was your rank on Liangwang Peak?" "The 4th, replied Jian Ruyun. "You're no match for me. Let's change to another one," said Zhuoruzhui while looking at Yu Siluo. "Big brother, you're the 2nd. Why don't you do it?" Yu Siluo snapped. "Can eldest senior brother defeat you?" Zhuoruzhui said, "He could defeat me before I came out from behind closed doors, but he can't after that." Yu Siluo asked, "Who else on Liangwang Peak can defeat you?" Zhuoruzhui put down the wet towel in his hand and picked up the chopsticks, saying, "Since nobody can defeat me, why are you still here? Are you going to treat me to a meal?" He was the personal disciple of the immortal Lu Si. He had the highest cultivation state and the strongest prowess among the younger generation of Aoyama. It could be said that he was invincible among all the 9 peaks. If today's outcome was determined by a fight, it would be impossible to have any other result. Big Brother Nanshan asked you to follow that person to Scenery Garden so that you could keep an eye on the situation there. He didn't ask you to go against our sect and Liangwang Peak. Ma Hua said earnestly while looking at Zhuo Ruzhui. He didn't try to hide his words from Gu Qing, meaning that he wanted Gu Qing to hear his words on purpose. Since Zhuo Ruzhui appeared on the stage, the auction concerning the shares of Aoyama had come to an end. The representatives of the major clans, including the Fong clan, left the Precious Tree House one after another, not daring to watch the fight between the immortal masters of Aoyama. You seem to have forgotten one thing. I've never been a member of Liangwang Peak, Shi said as he picked up the food with his chopsticks. So don't try to trick me with the rules of benevolence, righteousness, and morality of your Liangwang Peak, and don't try to play tricks in front of me. I don't mind telling you that Gu Qing is actually smarter than you, even though he looks honest. What on earth do you want to do? Demanded Ma Hua with a gloomy face. Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his head and glanced at him, retorting, "It's none of your business. There are masters who can control you," said Ma Hua. Zhuo Ruzhui said, "I'm a disciple of Aoyama, but Aoyama doesn't have a sect master now. I'm a disciple of Tianguang Peak, but Tianguang Peak doesn't have a peak master. Who can control me?" Jian Riyun said expressionlessly, "Now that you are a disciple of Aoyama, the rules of Aoyama will be able to control you." Zhuo Ruzhui glanced at him sympathetically, saying, "Is it hard to live in the sword jail? It's a pity that I'm on good terms with Shanghai Peak, so it's hard for me to get in there and experience it." Having said that, he withdrew his gaze and continued searching for his favorite dish, the green pepper in the fish maw with pickled peppers. Having said that, there was nothing more to be said. Looking at Zhuo Ruzhui on the platform, who acted as if he were in his own home, Jian Riyun showed a trace of resentment in his eyes. Since the death of his younger brother, his temperament had changed drastically. Ignoring the look in Yu Sailu's eyes, Jian Riyun pinched a sword instruction with his right hand and wielded the most powerful move of the old bird sword style, slashing toward the platform. The bright sword light flickered intermittently in the hall, arriving in front of the platform abruptly like a bird shuttling through the clouds. The sword light was hard to detect, so it was hard to block it. But the sword was resolute and agile. If this sword strike hit the target, even a swordsman in the broken sea state would be wounded severely. Zhuo Ruzhui didn't even lift his head. The chopsticks in his right hand left the plate of fish maw with pickled peppers, pointing at a spot in the air with some gravy on them. Crack! A bright spark appeared in front of the platform. It was the mark left by the collision of two flying swords. Jian Riyun snorted and was about to drive his flying sword down again. Zhuo Ruzhui wouldn't give him a chance. The tips of his chopsticks pointed randomly in the air, and the swallowing boat sword turned into a gray sword shadow and arrived in front of Jian Riyun in the blink of an eye. Jian Riyun folded his hands and formed a sword will. He called back his flying sword as quickly as possible, blocking the sword in front of him. There was a loud bang. The two swords collided. Jian Riyun was sent flying backward. His feet left a deep gully on the ground, and he bumped into the wall heavily. The walls of the Precious Tree House didn't have any windows, and they were protected by a defensive formation, so they were extremely strong. Even so, the walls were shaking violently, as if they were about to collapse. Jian Riyun was in a terrible situation. His face was as pale as a piece of paper, and his chest was full of blood essence. The flying sword hovering in front of him quivered slightly, a large crack appearing on its body. The most important thing for a swordsman in Aoyama was his flying sword. Since his flying sword was severely damaged, his sword pill must have been cracked as well. It would take him at least 10 years of arduous cultivation to recover. The swallowing boat sword hovered in front of Jian Riyun a few feet away from him with its head slightly lowered, looking like a sleepy fish, listless. However, everyone could sense the lethal intent exuding from the swallowing boat sword, and it could launch another thunderous strike to kill Jian Riyun at any moment. It was quiet in the Precious Tree House. The disciples of Liangwang Peak, including Ma Hua, all knew that Zhuo Ruzhui was very powerful, but they didn't expect him to be so powerful. Facing Jian Riyun, who was ranked 4th on Liangwang Peak, he defeated him easily without batting an eyelid. Yu Siluo knew that young brother Zhua had even shown mercy. Otherwise, he could have broken Jian Ryun's flying sword with the previous strike. Staring at Zhuo Ruzhui with resentment in his eyes, Jian Ryun said, "If you kill me, I'd like to see how you're going to explain this to the ancestors of Aoyama." "I hate talking about the ancestors. The disciples of Aoyama speak with their swords." Zhuo Ruzhui lifted his head and pointed at him, and those disciples of Liang Wang peek with his chopsticks, saying, "If your swords aren't as good as mine, you should learn to shut up." Chapter 590. Learning to shut up also meant learning to stop. The people of Aoyama had to learn not to interfere with anything related to Shinma Peak, be it the Gu family or the Precious Tree House. Otherwise, their hand would be chopped off by Zhuo Ruzhui, just like Jian Ryun's sword. Looking at Zhuo Ruzhui on the platform, Yu Siluo sighed and said, "Even if you don't consider yourself a disciple of Liang Wang Peak, you are not a disciple of Shinma Peak either. Since you're not a disciple of Shinma Peak, why do you have to stand up for them in such a violent way?" Zhuo Ruzhui put down his chopsticks and wiped his mouth with a wet towel. Finding the towel was cold, he glanced at the owner of the Precious Tree House and said, "Big Brother Nanshan knew what I would do when he asked me to go with Senior Grandmaster Jingyang." Ma Hua said with a gloomy expression, "Even if you can stop him today, what if the masters come? If that day comes, we have to ask the Master White Ghost to come. Let's have a good discussion." It was none other than Gu Qing who could make the threat sound so amiable. Ma Hua and the other disciples of Liang Wang Peak fell silent again. In that case, the people of Aoyama would have to ask the Master Night Howler to come. But who could do that? The people of Shinma Peak were the only ones who could make the head guard of Aoyama watch their home, and even use them as fighters. Jian Ryun stood up and wiped off the blood on the side of his face. He took back his damaged flying sword and stared at Zhuo Ruzhui, saying, "I'll kill that sword devil one day." "I wish you success," said Zhuo Ruzhui sympathetically. There was a sudden commotion outside the Precious Tree House. It seemed that someone was kneeling in front of the building and shouting something. Ma Hua listened carefully for a while, and his expression changed abruptly. He abruptly turned to look at Gu Qing and Zhuo Ruzhui. Tonight, the Jian family and the Ma family each lost 7 important figures. Some of them were worshippers, while others were important figures in the family. In the past few years, the Jian clan and the Ma clan had been suppressed extremely miserably, and their vitality had been greatly damaged. Recently, they had finally ushered in a turning point with great difficulty, and were in the process of recovering with great difficulty. These people were extremely important, and they had suddenly encountered such a calamity. What should they do? Ma Hua took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and said, "You guys actually killed people directly. This is too much." Jian Ryun knew what had happened, and the look in his eyes turned furious. Gu Qing said calmly, "These days 7 people from the Gu family died, and 7 people from each of your families also died. It's very fair." Zhuo Ruzhui walked down the stage and stood beside him. He suggested, "If you think it's unfair, you can also kill 7 members of the Yuan family of Lelong County." Yuan Chu was a disciple of the Yuan family of Lelong Commandery and a disciple of Shinma Peak. This arrangement was indeed fair. The problem was that Yuan Qijing's surname was also Yuan. "You've crossed the line." Looking at the two of them, Yu Siluo said gravely, "No matter who did it, the masters will demand an explanation. It wasn't us, nor was it anyone in Scenery Garden, nor was it the Master White Ghost. It's because we wouldn't do such a thing. What we said just now was out of anger." Ruzhui walked up and patted on Ma Hua's shoulder, saying, "It's probably a senior master of another sect who couldn't bear to see you guys do such a filthy thing." Seeing Zhuo Ruzhui and Gu Qing walk out of the Precious Tree House, a disciple of Liang Wang Peak couldn't help but ask, "Are you letting them go just like that?" "I found some clues," Ma Hua said to Yu Siluo. "I want to go and have a look." Yu Siluo understood what he meant and reminded him, "You can only target the murderer. Don't get involved in other matters." The Jiaxing Tower was the most famous scenic spot in Shangzhou City, as well as the highest tower. It was a must-visit place for tourists. Even Jingjiu and Zhao Liu had been here before. However, they didn't come to see the Jiaxing Tower at that time. Instead, they stood on the top of the Jiaxing Tower, looking at the brightly lit restaurant not far away. That restaurant was a brothel. After more than 30 years, its business was still thriving, so it must have a powerful background. A man wearing a conical hat walked into the brothel. He easily won the favor of the customer with a golden leaf, and even the old he received him in person. The man in the conical hat entered the room, but he didn't ask for girls, food, or good wine. Instead, he asked for 30 snow-white steamed buns, saying that he was a bit hungry. In a place like the brothel, there were all kinds of strange people. As long as the man in the conical hat was generous, the oldie could even watch him write a novel in 40 days, let alone eat 30 steamed buns. So the oldie did as he was told. The man in the conical hat was generous, and his appetite was also astonishing. In a short while, he had eaten 5 steamed buns and half a pot of strong tea. The oldie was obviously different from the oldie of other brothels. Because he was indeed a bit old, his deep wrinkles couldn't be covered even with a thick layer of powder. Yet he was still able to manage this brothel, so he must have some outstanding skills. Watching the man in the conical hat eating the steamed buns in silence, she showed sympathy in her eyes. She poured more tea for him, and took the liberty of having a maid serve 8 small plates of meat and 5 vegetables. Looking at those small plates of worthless dishes, the man in the conical hat was a bit surprised and appreciative. He said to the oldie, "This steamed bean curd in chili oil looks good." The oldie said with a smile, "It's said to be a local product from the south of Izhou City. Many people think it's good, but I can't taste it. How about 2 more servings for you?" The man in the conical hat nodded, grabbed a handful of golden leaves at random, and said, "After eating, I'll take a nap. I'll disturb you when I'm full." The oldie put away the golden leaves without a trace, and stood up, saying, "Please take a rest." It didn't take long for the steamed bean curd in chili oil to be served. It was piled high on a large plate of fish, looking like a mountain of flames. The man in the conical hat ate the steamed bean curd and slowly ate the steamed buns. The more he ate, the more fragrant they became. He naturally recalled the days when he was in the Baotong Zen temple. Tong Lu had died a long time ago. Yijan was fighting the snow monsters in White Town, and no one knew when he would die. Tong Yin had been missing for many years, and perhaps she had been killed by those people at the Shinma Peak. When would he be killed by those people at the Shinma Peak? Half of the mountain of flames formed by the steamed bean curd and chili oil had collapsed, and the 30 steamed buns had disappeared without a trace. The man in the conical hat drank half a pot of warm tea, took off his boots, conical hat, and mask, lay down on the soft bed, and closed his eyes to rest. The dim yellow light shone on his green face, making him look eerie. It was easy to kill the 14 members of the Jian family and the Ma family. The only troublesome part was those formations, but it wasn't too difficult for a genius of the deviant sex like him. Suzai opened his eyes and sighed while looking at the ceiling. As the young master of the mysterious dark sect, he had been ambitious and wanted to conquer the world and compete with the orthodox sections. At the very least, he wanted to find a spiritual source for the mysterious dark sect and get rid of the plight that had lasted for thousands of years. But now, he had become a killer, a postman, and a dirty worker for the Aoyama sect. Well, he was neither a slave of the Aoyama sect nor of the Shinma Peak. He was a slave of that person. If he wasn't satisfied with the job before, he was quite willing and even a bit proud of it now. That was the immortal Jingyang. Tong Yin had said that Jingjiu had been at the top for a long time. Now that he thought about it, it was all nonsense. If the immortal Jingyang wasn't at the top, then who was? Suzai took out a few pieces of paper from his chest pocket. Looking at the sentences that he still couldn't understand, he felt hopeful. It was as if he had suddenly seen a sliver of morning light in the endless darkness. The sentences written on the paper were the antidote to the poison of the pill given by Jingjiu. No, the immortal Jingyang. It was indeed helpful to him, and the effect was miraculous. The poison of the pill hidden in his bone marrow and internal organs was gradually forced out and transformed into an energy similar to the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, gradually spreading to every part of his body. Now, the intervals between the poison of the pill acted up were getting longer and longer, and the demonic wheel was gradually perfected. His cultivation state had improved by leaps and bounds. He believed that neither Zhuo Ruzhui nor Lu Shui was a match for him at the moment. Thinking of all this, Su Zai soon recovered his spirits. He got up, put on a mask and a conical hat, and called for the old turtle. The old turtle looked at him and asked with a smile, "What do you like to do?" The old turtle didn't ask about the girls, but about the entertainment, because she could tell that this guest with the conical hat was not an ordinary person. Su Zai said to her with a smile, "I like you very much, so I don't want to kill you." The old turtle's smile faded away, and he held the warning magic treasure in his sleeve tightly with his right hand, though he didn't reveal any fear on his face. "It's not easy to understand what you mean," he said lightly. Su Zai said, "Don't misunderstand me. I just want to ask you something and do something, but I don't want anybody else to know about it." The old turtle said with a slightly cold expression, "I'll tell you what I can. Otherwise, I have no choice but to ask you to leave." A murder happened in this brothel about 30 years ago. A few guards were beheaded by a blood-red flying sword. Su Zai shot a glance at the old turtle and continued, "Judging by your age, you should have heard about this if you had been working here all this time." The old turtle stared into Su Zai's eyes in silence for a long time, and then asked, "How did you know about this? What do you want to do?" Su Zai said, "I'm here to kill some people at someone's request. Since this brothel is still the same, the owner should still be the same owner, right?" The old turtle lowered her gaze a bit and said, "That's right. And coincidentally, the owner is in the brothel today." Su Zai stared into her eyes in silence, saying, "Can I take it that you know very well who I should kill?" The old turtle lifted her head and combed the hair by her temples, looking like a young girl. "Please follow me," she said calmly. Su Zai started killing. He killed from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, and from the front floor to the backyard. Except for the prostitutes and some servants, he killed almost all the guards and caretakers. The old turtle followed him all the time. After the owner of the brothel was killed by Su Zai, the old turtle finally felt relieved and almost fell to the ground. She managed to steady herself by holding onto a green tree in the yard. She covered her chest with her hands, with tears in her eyes. Su Zai shot a glance at her and knew that it was not sadness but relief. "Why?" he asked. The old turtle asked back, "Why did you do all these things?" "I don't know," Su Zai said. "It was someone else's request." The old turtle's eyes suddenly brightened as she asked, "Can I know who that person is?" "No," Su Zai replied. The light in the old turtle's eyes grew dimmer, but they didn't turn into a deathly gray color. They were as tranquil as a deep well. Su Zai said, "Many people have seen you following me. I'll take you to a place later and hide you well. A few days later, I'll find a new place to live with the money I collected today. You'll live the rest of your life well." The old turtle turned around and looked at the burning brothel, saying slowly, "I'm almost 50 years old, and I've been here all my life. How can I live the rest of my life well?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.